So let's start off. Who is Bert Jones Pottery?
Yeah, so I am a CSAD graduate of the Arts Design and Maker course that became deeply obsessed with making pots through my first pot 7 years ago, and was pretty hooked from the outset. And then after I actually finished the BA and started a master's, so that would be about 4 years ago now, started to get like a bit more serious about making pots. And then this little studio that we're in was created 3 years ago, and I built a gas kiln 2 years ago. And that's kind of like a very short, compressed version of how, like the Bert the Potter endeavour came to be. But essentially, from the first pot, I was like, oh, this is basically
This is you.
what I'm going to spend my time doing now. Yeah. Which made kind of adult decision making very easy, because I was a bit like, you've just got to make the decisions that facilitate you getting to do this.
Yep.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Which was really nice, because I've always been a very, very indecisive person, especially when I was younger. Like coming out of school, I went to do a physics degree out of school.
Really?
Yeah. It did not go well. It was not for me. Physics, then mechanical engineering, then financial advice.
Wow.
Yeah, and then an art foundation where I made a few pots, and I was like, okay.
You found your
Yeah. But yeah, like I say, I was like, what am I supposed to do? And then I threw a few pots, and I was like, okay.
So
Amazing.
Bert Jones, wannabe physicist.
Yeah.
What was the other one? Physicist.
Physics, mechanical engineering. So
Mechanical engineering. So you could have been working with myself.
Yeah.
Financial advising.
Yeah.
Pot thrower.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
And obviously not looking back. You've 7 years now. You're not looking back on any of them. This is wholeheartedly you.
Yeah.
And do you think this will be you for forevermore?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly hope so. So I did this BA at Cardiff Met, Artist Design and Maker, which is a great course.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of a contemporary craft, applied arts vibe. You can do anything three-dimensional, any material. But it was led by a ceramicist. And I loved studying at Cardiff Met. And as soon as it came to the end of the BA, I was like, right, I definitely want to do a master's of some kind. So I did a research master's, because I was quite into the whole academic side of like doing research around craft and that kind of stuff, craft and perception. So I started at Cardiff Met 7 years ago, and I haven't left. I'm a part-time PhD student, and I'm a technician there now.
Right.
Nice.
And I'm making pots. So I loved the whole uni education experience. And yeah, I've kind of tried to curate my entire life around ceramics, pottery, and Cardiff Met, I suppose.
And do you think you would have enjoyed that experience if it wasn't for the pots? Do you know, would you still be there doing the PhD? Would you still be there doing the technician? Do you enjoy that side as much as you enjoy the pots, or do you think throwing pots really dry? I keep saying pots as if pots is the only thing you do. It's clearly not. Or do you think that really drives your enjoyment into the education and the further research? And
Oh yeah, good question. I think sometimes I get people that say like, oh, you must just be like, are you just doing the PhD so that you can do some teaching afterwards or whatever? And I'm not. Like, I'm really passionate about the PhD. I kind of feel like all education should be how the PhD is, which is a self-directed project.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where you have a viva at the end and you say, this is my contribution, this is what I've learned. It's practice-based, so I'm getting to make pots, and I'm getting to do these kind of this philosophical and academic research into functional pots. I'm doing that because I'm passionate about it. But if I really just had to pick one thing, I would just be in here making pots.
So talk to us a little bit, you said functional pots. Talk to us a little bit more about what, if you can, of course, about what that PhD, what is it you're experimenting within throwing pots that's so interesting?
So I started out in a quite similar place to, I think, a lot of craft people, where where you're angry with fine art because fine art doesn't take craft seriously enough.
Yeah.
I had an axe to grind. It's like, God damn, fine art doesn't take pots seriously. Which is not really true. The more I look into it, some pots are taken very seriously. But the project now has ended up in a place where I'm looking at how fine art kind of understands functional objects in particular. Function is an important bit of that, because you do get craftspeople that are making like very sculptural kind of art-based pieces, and they aren't kind of involved in the conversation as much. But people like me that are making, simple functional wares, but I always say, like, you would never find a breakfast bowl on a plinth in a sculpture exhibition in a fine art gallery.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And it was all summed up really well for me, actually. Just started reading a book on Lucy Ree. It's an autobiography of Lucy Ree, who's like a really kind of monolithic figure in pottery. and written by a potter called Emmanuel Cooper, who's another really monolithic figure in pottery. So really, really lovely book about Lucy Ree's life. And in the very first paragraph of this book, it said that when Lucy Ree started making pots, she was interested in making functional pots, not abstract sculptural pots. And this sums it up entirely for me, because as far as I'm concerned, functional pots are abstract sculptural pots. Like any pot, like case in point, coffee cup, like it's not representational of anything. It's just this weird little abstract sculptural object. And obviously it's a vessel, so you can put fluids in it, which is great. But I'm just really compelled by like jugs and bowls and spouts and handles as just these weird kind of sculptural things. And that's kind of a good way to sum up what I'm looking at in my PhD. Like, how can we talk about pots as these abstract sculptural things, instead of fine art is always putting them in some kind of cultural narrative. It's always saying like they're ethnic or they're feminine or they're problematically domestic or they're problematically functional. And I don't care about any of that cultural subtext stuff. I just think they're really beautiful aesthetic things.
So how do you... So I think you've got a similar view to, certainly to my view, for We Are Makers, where it's like, I don't really care what other people are doing. Good luck to them. Someone wants to contact us and ask how we're doing something, more than happy to share it, but I don't care how you're doing it. How do you stop that leaching in? You know, you talk about how other people do it as either functional or how do you stop that leaching in? Because it seems like you've got a very clear, I'm doing it my way, I'm interested in doing it my way, there's these two other ways, but I'm doing it this way, or there's these X amount of other ways. How do you avoid that? Or maybe you don't avoid it, other inspiration leaching in?
A really good, useful thing one of my PhD supervisors said to me was, don't try and tear other people's towers down, try and build your own up, and really try and focus on intellectual generosity as opposed to criticality.
Like that.
So it's completely fair for people to say, if you're like a fine art critique or theorist in the mid-20th century, talking about mid-20th century modernism, talking about how domesticity has no place in fine art galleries, that's fine. It's really interesting. Don't be angry about it. Just acknowledge it and be like, that's great, but that's not what I think. Here's what I think. And here's what it has to give. So just try and have like a really kind of positive, open-minded spin on it, I think. Yeah, don't get caught up in being annoyed, because it doesn't do you or anybody else. Basically.
And there's so many people that do get caught up in being annoyed.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we're so networked now, aren't we? It's impossible. I think this is one of the other really difficult things about being a maker now, is to try and like find your own voice, because we're so saturated in content. And I think it's like important almost to try and not, like, obviously it's great to have influences and it's great to have to be inspired by other stuff.
Yeah.
But, you know, I am one of those people that's fallen foul of just doom scrolling through Instagram.
I think we all are, to be honest.
Right, it's so easily done. And you're like, and I'm there like, oh, I need to make one of those. I need to make one of those. Why am I making those? I need to do pit-fired pots. I need to do this. I need to do this shape. I'm like, well, but you just need to
do
you.
Yeah, exactly. Which is, difficult.
And that's why people like your work, because, you know, you're doing you. And
So that's exactly it, isn't it? I think we've either been very lucky, or we just have fallen into or worked our way into a really, really great bunch of people, you know, like all the makers that we seem to be involved with. There seems to be this thing where the easiest way to get your head above the parapet is like pushing yourself up off other people's heads on social media. Like, let's just use other people to push yourself up. But there certainly seems to be a thing in the makers community, and it'd be interesting to know what the potters community is like, or if there even is a potters community, where all other makers just seem to be driving other makers forward. I think there's a collective thought and feeling and theme throughout that actually, if all makers get recognised, then I'll get my little piece of that pie. And I'll get my little piece of that pie. And everyone just seems to be on that same boat. How do you find that in the smaller, the potter community?
So the pottery community is essentially relatively small, but it is exactly as you describe, really, really wonderful. And I think if you do get a bad apple, so to speak, people smell them a mile off, and everybody's a bit like, whoa, you know, like that vibe is not welcome here. And like, as you say, it's just a really kind, egalitarian, supportive community. It's quite a strange thing to do, really.
I guess when you're working by yourself, you know, it's always nice to speak with others. You know, I find that important.
Yeah. So I was at the show Art and Clay a couple of weeks ago, and it's basically nothing but, it's predominantly potters and a few people that make other kind of like sculptural things, but loads of people that sit in sheds like this or studios by themselves for long portions of the year. So it's so great to be out with all these other people that have all these like shared interests where you can talk about, you know, feldspars and glaze faults and kilns and all these other
They
things.
understand what you're talking about.
Yeah,
Yeah, the
all
stuff that when you go home and your wife's like, oh God, she's talking about the kilt again.
Yeah. Like when I'm talking to my fiance about like, oh, that clay body bloated again, I can't believe it. And she's very understanding, bless her.
Yeah.
But yeah, so when everybody gets like put out into this community where they can see each other, it's just really, really lovely atmosphere. And yeah, it's very generous, very open. And I think it's interesting you say about like, you know, people that want to kind of climb up. What do you say? Like push on other people to kind of get ahead, as opposed to raise each other up.
Rather than everybody being like, let's all muck in and build a step.
Yeah.
Everyone's like, well, if you two stay there, I can push myself up off you guys.
Yeah, but I feel like there's some kind of inherent thing with makers whereby like if you can see somebody else that's doing what you're doing in some regard, like obviously very different to you, but nonetheless, you know, they're in a studio, they're working with this material, they're putting lots of hours in. There's this kind of immediate mutual respect you can have for that.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter where they're from or what they make.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, I know how arduous it is
Yeah.
to try and do this thing you're doing and to make it work. And it's just kind of like an immediate reciprocity, which is really, really lovely thing to be a part of.
Love it.
And again, coming back to the kind of Instagram, like ultimately networked world, we're all in these kind of pseudo digital communities, which are great in many regards. Like Instagram can be a really lovely place, but they really lack that kind of like tangible, embodied kind of human aspect, I think. And so to be a part of like a community, like a craft community, I think is just a massive privilege in this kind of day and age, this environment that we live in.
So, well, we absolutely agree. You know, we find ourselves, we're very fortunate and very, very privileged to be kind of parts of all of these smaller communities and the bigger maker community in one. So we kind of get the best of all worlds, like selfishly, yeah. Great.
Is this why you guys started We Are Makers? Just make loads of nice friends.
Secretly, we had no friends. We're now financially in a massive black hole, but do you know what? We got loads of friends out the back of it. It's great.
Well, I was a maker myself.
Yeah.
And, you know, I know the struggles and everything that goes with it. So that was a big driving force. And obviously I was working myself. So, to have that community of people now that I've met through We Are Makers is incredible. Like, I still keep in touch with people from the first edition.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
And we're interviewing Holly Cooper on Sunday, who was in our first edition. So it's just like, that was a conscious decision for us, wasn't it?
Yeah.
To not just be like, feature you once, never talk to you again. Like, that's not what we're in this for. We're in for,
we
community.
We had that probably two main pin things that were, one, it's not a one and done, because every commercial magazine are one and done, yeah, and two, free to the makers. So, Kate, when you started and you were a maker, you know, it's the cost of, and it's something we'll get into yourself as well, the cost of advertising. It's like, so you want a postage stamp in the bottom of whatever magazine that we won't name, £1,500, please. We're like, where are you getting that? Do you know what I mean? £1,500, what's that? That's new workbenches, that's new.
Yeah.
Like, what? And they're not, I mean, yes, there is obviously, it's an investment in yourself, but they're not quantifiable investments. You can't be like, I know I got these orders from that. That's a very hard thing to do. Yeah.
So
or we found it that way.
So how do you advertise yourself? Like, is it?
Yeah, so it's so funny that you say that about like the little thumbnail in a magazine, because I think it was maybe some point last year, and some like really big famous magazine there was an email in my inbox, and I was like, oh my God, Bert, you've made it. This is going to be the game changer. I was like, whoever it is, unnamed magazine wants me. And then like I got quite overexcited about this, and it was exactly what you said. It was like, and they kind of make out like they're doing you a favor. Like, we'll feature you and it'll be great, and it'll just be.
You're so excited, and you're like, yes, and then you just realize, okay,
literally £1,500 for a thumbnail the size of a passport photo.
And that's it's annoying.
They do a great job of making you feel like they selected you for that thumbnail, though.
Yeah,
we don't want anybody else's £1,500. We want you £1,500.
Exactly.
You've made it.
Yeah, so funny. But yeah, so in terms of marketing, I have basically done nothing but post on Instagram.
Okay, so Instagram's your main source of.
Yes.
This is how you can find me.
Yeah, and like I've had a website since I left uni, because that was something that you like involved in the third year project. You had to set up a website. But really, yeah, Instagram has been the sole thing. So while I think that there's some problems with social media in general, I still am massively thankful for Instagram.
Because I also know you have a newsletter list, which is
so
really important.
So I've only just recently actually pulled my finger out, and
it actually is really important because someone said to me, like, what if social media just goes down? What else are you going to have?
Yeah.
So to build that up is really important.
Yeah. And I've just tried to actually kind of use my website a bit more, and I'm just trying to kind of, I guess it was like a half and half, where because I'm not actually that far into this career, I wasn't like, I didn't want to go too hard for like shouting about my practice if I didn't think it was actually that shout worthy yet. And so I'm just getting to a place now where I'm kind of much more satisfied with some of the projects I've been doing, the content I'm been creating. So I'm a bit like, okay, now let's document it really nicely and let's start to share it. So that's like, I did a glaze testing like project, which is now up on my website, which was really nice to do. And I'm going to do a big kiln build page.
That's cool. I like that.
And again, that's kind of going back to these kind of like very generous, like giving maker communities. So many people have like given me so many tips and so much information, whether it be on material technology or kiln building. I'm just really keen to like make it all public, and because it can be a bit clandestine, you know, like, oh, what glazes are you using? I'm like, none of them are mine really, like they're from books. And so yeah, I'm trying to consciously now kind of foster the website presence a bit more and the mailing list. But really, Instagram has been super useful.
Yeah, you don't use like Twitter or Pinterest or anything like that.
No, and I'm a bit. I always like Florian Gadsby is always a good touch point. Like, do you guys know Florian Gadsby? It's like relatively like monolithic Instagram potter that's been doing it for a long time. I think he's posted every day for like 7 years or something.
Got a really high Instagram.
Yeah, and like stunning work, amazing photography. But he's on like Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, long format videos, short format videos, all immaculate.
Videos,
and I'm just like,
I know.
when do you sleep?
When
do you have a beer? Like when? Like how on earth is this feasible? So no, I was very happy just to like commit to Instagram. And it was about a year ago. Started posting like basically every day, and I've just tried to engage with it a bit more. Actually, like just getting back to comments and commenting on things, and just trying to like actually
engaging with everyone who's engaging with you.
Yeah. Like to actually, you know, because it is a community and it is lovely. Like I've never, touch wood, I've never been trolled on Instagram. Doesn't seem so common as like on Facebook or Twitter. No, which I keep at arm's length. So yeah, like marketing wise, apart from like going to some shows in person, but you know that's not like. And my sister is a PR marketing guru.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, I can't talk about anything without her being like, well, but this is the plan. This is what's happening, which is fantastic. But I'm often like, oh, I'm just trying to make the pots. I just need to make the pots.
Yeah. So you mentioned there the you know, when you started, and it's, I can't remember the exact words you used, but it was almost along the lines of the sort of fake it till you make it kind of thing. Like, at what point did you think like, this is worth posting, this is worth sharing with the world? What was your, right, I've made it, this is me, I'm a good potter now? Or do you still feel that way, or have you ever felt that way?
So, and this comes back to what we were saying, like off camera at the beginning, the people that you spoke to yesterday, who are obviously very experienced, very well established, and that was really interesting for me to hear that they were like, yeah, you never quite reach, like, you never transcend to the plateau of relaxation and comfortability. So I like, there was definitely earlier on when I was like, I don't want to share these things because they're not good enough, and just kind of coming to terms with that and being like, well, it doesn't matter. People are there for the journey. People aren't going to say, why have you posted it? It's not good enough. Yeah. Just share what you're doing, and you're getting better, and it's grand. So try not to worry about that as much. But in terms of actually like feeling like I'd kind of hit some kind of watermark in my own head of this is like professionally up to scratch, some arbitrary thing in my own head. I don't really know what I'm basing it on. Was actually literally 3 or 4 weeks ago, and it was like I unloaded a couple of kiln loads of work, and it was all out on my table in my glaze shed, and it was the first time I'd had like a big body of pots that I was a bit like, and I think makers have a tendency to be overly critical, and it was what keeps driving you, and it's quite a natural thing. But that was one of the first times I had all these pots out, and I was like, I wasn't like, this is the best thing I've ever seen, but I couldn't say that it was not up to par. I was like, this looks to me like good quality making. And that was like pretty massive moment for me actually. Which was really nice. Yeah, I was like, try and remember this bit, try and breathe this in, because something's going to go wrong in a couple of weeks, and I
think you sometimes forget to like almost, I don't know, praise yourself. Yeah. Sometimes you need to take a step back and be like, look what I've done.
Yeah.
You can sometimes get so lost in just getting it done where you don't take a step back. So that's good. We
were talking about this just the other week. The first time that we'd really done anything like that with We Are Makers. Because as soon as, and for people that don't know the timeline of the publication, this is pretty important. Like, the 5th edition only went to print yesterday. Kate's contacting makers last month about the 6th edition. It is like it's just like a 7-month turnaround. There's a big overlap between all that happening. We're great. We've got a great couple of freelancers, a great team that helps push that over the line. But the amount of work that goes into it.
So when I'll get the 5th edition in my hands, I'll be like, oh, it's amazing. And then I'll be like, right, next one.
Yeah.
Do you know?
You don't stop to revel in it. Yeah.
No, and we made a conscious effort of putting on the premiere for the team of the documentary, An Honest Representation of the Modern Maker, at the Scotsman Cinema House in Edinburgh. And it was like, you have to sit down there and watch it. Because you can't have your phone out, so it's like an hour and 5 minutes, and that was the first time we'd sat back and just been like...
I was up the back just crying, like...
Oh my God.
Bubbling away, I'm like, Kate, be quiet, I'm trying to watch it.
You finally paused for thought and just burst into tears. Yeah.
It's one of those.
Yeah. So, I mean, other than your moment 3-4 weeks ago, do you set aside time to do that? Do you set aside time to just... Or is it something that you consciously know you should do and maybe don't do enough?
So there's a couple of aspects to that. The first one is the financial one. Sometimes you're so busy, I think, like trying to make a living, especially early doors, when you're not very established and the sales aren't as abundant. When you're just like, okay, we need to get these pots out of the kiln and we need to get them somewhere where somebody might buy them as fast as possible, and you're not really stopping to like really touch base with the objects you're making, and you're not really reflecting on them, and that's really problematic for a whole host of reasons. And firstly, because it's not very kind for yourself, but also you're not attending to what's good or not good about the work, right? You're not really looking at these objects. And there's been a couple of instances where it's been a pot that I've really liked, and I've just flogged it on the cheap because I needed money, basically. Yeah. Which is kind of it's understandable because money is important, basically. But there was a few conversations I had in reference to a documentary about a kind of Jedi-level potter called Richard Batterham, who's a bit of an institution within studio pottery in Britain, that passed away earlier this year. And he set up a pottery about 50 years ago and designed a range of pots and stayed in the same studio making the same range of pots for 50 years. And his kind of mantra was like, well, if you take a pot out of the kiln and you think it's quite good, you might as well try and do it again because you might be able to do a little bit better. And who are you to say that it's finished and that it's perfect? And he did this in this kind of like monastic, iterative way. And these pots kind of very slowly evolved and changed and were just the most, even if you don't love the work, it's just really extraordinarily quality. And he had this huge attic in his studio where he'd keep all these like absolute peaches of pots. So if it was a really good pot, he kept it. There was no two ways about it. He was like, okay, this one is really, really, really good. I need to keep it and I need to live with it for a while. And there was a few people I talked to about that. And I think basically after these conversations I had and this realization that I was actually like probably doing myself over by not holding on to pots. There's 2 shelves in my kiln shed now, which are the keeper shelves. So if it comes out of the kiln, even if I think it's a bit weird or if I really like it or I'm not sure about it, it just goes on these shelves and I'm not allowed to do anything with it. And then just every time I'm in the shed, I'm just looking at these pots. And it's this kind of like...
That's a really good idea.
Yeah, so like this guy, Richard Batterham, would say, like, you have to learn to look. You have to really learn to, like... If you're like, okay, I love this handle. Like, this handle, for some reason, is just, by a long way, the best handle I've ever made. Like, it's not necessarily going to be obvious why that is. And you need to live with it, and you need to, like, hold it, and you need to drink from that cup, and you need to really... Some
good advice.
Immerse yourself in that object. Because these things can be quite like slow and tricky, I think, perceptually. That's one aspect of it. And then the other one in terms of, so like going back to your question, like I have spent more time trying to like live around the pots I really love and like put them up on the shelf, like in the living room. So I'm just like around there and like just seeing them or whatever. The second thing is although Instagram is a bit of a slog, and many of us are a slave to it in some regard, I've managed to get into like a relatively good like mental relationship with it in general. But the really good thing about it is how it forces you to take photos, and that's been a massive thing for me. I really enjoy the process. Like I really enjoy taking photos. I'm not very good at it. I have to take loads. Like if you see one photo on Instagram, there was probably 15 versions of it, which was slightly bunk.
It's probably the same for a lot of people.
Yeah. Like I'm just
we're all striving for that perfect picture.
And I'm not a photographer, I'm a potter, so
I think your photography's pretty good.
Well, you're very kind, but like I say, there's been a lot of practice and a lot of dodgy pictures. But I've got this massive Google Drive of I've tried to take pictures of like almost. I tried to be thorough after every firing, like at least one picture of every like notable thing or of every kind of thing. But sometimes it's been like Christmas and the previous firing messed up and I've had to refire everything and the show is tomorrow and I've just had to wrap it all and some things get lost in the ether. But that practice of photographing stuff has been really valuable. And also it'll be the thing where I'm like, they're all in the Google Drive and I'm looking for a photo to post and I'll be like, oh, look at that photo of that pot. And I would stop and be like, I actually really like that pot and I'm really proud of that pot. So that's been a kind of really healthy, accidental process of reflection, I suppose, which has helped me into those like, oh, actually, Bert. And I don't know if it's in shot actually, but on the shelves by there, you see there's two mugs next to each other?
Yeah.
And one of them is like unglazed and it's got a really big eerie handle and a sharp rim. Yeah. And the next one is like the style of flat white that I used to make.
Yeah.
And those live next to each other to be like, so the one on the left is the first mug I ever made. And the one on the right is, like a year old or 2 years old or something. So that's just there as a little like, you are getting better at this bit.
I like that.
You know, a little, it's so easy to be cruel to yourself in your brain, but it's great to have a tangible like,
thing in front of you.
Look at the rubbish mug.
You can't argue
they're
two very different
exactly.
pots.
Yeah, you can't argue. That's the crucial thing.
Yeah.
I have to, and that's why these visual things are, I think, really important for me.
And is that that process of taking your pictures, and was that something that you've always done? Was it something you accidentally stumbled on? Something you learnt through maybe the PhD, or you just always done it?
No. I had an Instagram account before I went to uni, and I just used it in the same way that everybody did, just to kind of document my life. I've only ever had one account, so if you scroll back far enough, it's like pictures of me when I was 20, really drunk, or on holiday, or just random Bert's life pictures. And then at some point during uni, we had to be taking photos for like a visual. We had to have a blog, like alongside sketchbooks and stuff. So I was taking more photos, but predominantly on my phone. And then I made a few pots that I was like, oh, I think maybe we had to make an artist book, and I needed some better pictures. So like went into the little like backdrop room in the photo department of uni, and I took a few photos. And then I just felt like some people are awesome at taking photos on their phone.
It's really annoying, isn't it?
It's so annoying. And some people, my friend, like she did a thing on her feed where it was like, guess which one's on a DSLR and guess which one's on a camera, on my phone camera. And I was just like, I cannot believe. But anyway, I'm not very good at it, basically. And so I took some advice off, it was John O'Smart, the guy I mentioned earlier, posted saying, more people will meet your work digitally than physically. Therefore, it is important that you can take at least a decent photo. And his advice was to get a nifty 50, which is a Canon 50mm lens, which is like £100. You get a nice depth of field. It's fixed focus.
Yep.
And I bought one of those and put my camera in manual, and have just been like basically working in that way for like 4 years. Just like I said, taking loads of rubbish photos, but slowly taking better ones.
All self-taught?
Like praise be to YouTube, basically.
Yeah.
And just being like,
all of this is praise be to YouTube.
Yeah.
All of this is like, we need to do a podcast. How to podcast. Search.
I think as a maker, you just have to do what you can and learn what you can. You know.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of learning, a lot of jack of all trades.
Yeah, a lot of searching.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's like going back to the maker community thing we were talking about earlier. That's another thing that really unites people. That like very like, well, if I can't do it, I'm gonna have to have a go, basically.
Yeah.
And just being happy to try and turn your hand to anything to get things to work. But the photography thing was accidental, basically, and just kind of happened quite naturally, and has just become something I really like doing.
Right.
That always helps.
Yeah, exactly. I just wish there was more time in the day.
For that, yeah.
That extra, like, if it was just a 25-hour day, I could just get 1 hour of photo in every day instead of cramming it in.
Yeah.
So that's a good segue on to. So what does a typical day look like for you in the studio? Or, well, you've kind of got a couple of typical days, because I presume you've got set days that you're at the university, and then do you set aside set days here?
Yes, so I work at the university as a technician in the evenings on Wednesday and Thursday. So that's like a 5 p.m. till 9 p.m. evening shift. So during term time only, so that means that I have Monday and Tuesday and Friday completely to myself, and then I have Wednesday and Thursday where I know I'm doing this evening shift. So I try and have like an evening during the day, basically.
Okay.
So I'll work for the morning, have a couple of hours off in the afternoon, and go into uni. But I'm always trying to juggle being a potter, being a PhD student at the same time, and then also doing these evening shift hours. So yeah, typical is like quite hard to come by for me, essentially. And what's been really nice over the summer, because term time is out for the BA students, I haven't been in uni doing that technician job, and I've just like paused my PhD because it's part-time anyway. I've got some flexibility.
Right.
So for the last 6 to 8 weeks, all I've done is be a potter. It's been amazing.
Nice.
So, and Rachel just keeps being like, what are you doing tomorrow? And I'm like, I told you, I'm making pots. That's it. So yeah, and that seems to be, when I am actually just doing that, it's basically a big old making phase where I'm in here throwing, and I've got an electric kiln here to do my biscuit firing.
Right.
And once I've got all the biscuit work ready, I'm driving that like 5 minutes to a kiln shed. So once I've done like 3 to 4 weeks of making, I've then got like a week maybe where I'm glazing, packing, firing, which is like, yeah, really nice. But that's only typical for a small amount of time. And like if I've got a big PhD deadline, like basically I just have to be very flexible around like when I've got shows, when I've got shops, when I've got deadlines for the PhD. Yeah, like typical is, as I say, pretty difficult to come by. Which is challenging in some senses, but I am almost entirely autonomous apart from those shifts where I go to uni, which are always locked in, and it's kind of nice to have a linchpin, remember what day it is, you know. Yeah, outside of that, I'm just kind of like chopping and changing as I need to.
Right. So if you're coming in to do just pots, so we're not talking about all the other hats that you wear, what does that look? Is it sketch based? Are you working purely in clay to find a form that you like?
Oh yeah.
Are you still introducing new forms? What?
Yeah. So again, because I'm like relatively, I would say like early on in my career, I've only just kind of landed in like a range of standard wear. And that was one of the problems. I kept wanting to sell online, but I kept making different things and like really small batches of stuff, and I didn't want to list like loads of individual objects.
Yeah.
So I've got a shop actually going live today, this evening, just like my first big chunky online shop on my website. And it's been the first time I've been like flat white cup in satin white finish, and there's 12 of them, and I just have to post the one picture and tell the website how many units there are, which is a real relief.
And that's the first time you've done that?
Yeah, first time I've done that.
Oh, exciting.
Yeah, which is cool.
Clip that and post that tonight, Kate.
Yeah.
Oh, you're very kind. Thank you, guys. But yeah, so I really enjoy drawing, and I get slightly frustrated actually in uni that students don't do more of it. But I'll tend to work for like a while. Like I've got all these forms kind of locked in at the minute, and I'm pretty happy with them for all the standard wear that I'm making in like small batches. So I'll make like anywhere from like, I suppose, 20 to 30 of like a specific cup, so like a flat white cup or a cappuccino cup or a beaker or whatever it is, and those are locked in at the minute, but they all do exist in like relatively meticulous drawings. So I really like that as a way to like solidify it before I start doing it. But I'll do that, maybe I'll spend like a couple of days drawing, maybe like once a year.
Okay.
And I'll just be like, okay, these are all the things that I've like, here are all the like the things that I've bookmarked on Instagram that I found like really lovely or really interesting, or things that I've seen out and about, going through all my phone folders, going through like all the bookmarks online, going through any books that I've been looking at, in like quite an obsessive way, I suppose. I'll spend like a day just like collecting all those images. So I've got them all in one place, and then the next day, like rough sketches of all of them, like squishing them together, combining them, whatever it is, and then another day really meticulously finalizing them into objects that all go in a big folder, almost always A3 and in like some kind of fine liner. But yeah, that's quite rare. And then the other thing, like you can see on the big roller paper behind the hot air balloon, that there's like little scribbly sketches. So if something comes to my mind when I'm in here, that's been dubbed the paper brain, because you can just scribble anything on there, like if you really need to do it. So yeah, I do draw, but quite sporadically. But mainly, like, so a typical day, if I'm actually potting, like, get up at around 7, have some breakfast and a cup of tea, try and be in here at like 8 o'clock with like the longest form podcast I can find, so I don't have to change it.
Yeah,
that's what Jack was saying.
Yeah. We had this very same discussion. Kate's like, well, it'll be 20 minutes, 40 minutes. Will people listen to an hour? I'm like, if it's under an hour and a half, it doesn't go on. Yeah, because you have to change it.
So true.
Unless it's scrolling through them, Spotify's good for it because it will scroll through them. But I go out my way to find the longest ones. Yeah.
I'm a really big fan of this guy Blind Boy, and he's got some that are like hour and a half, 2 hours, and he like apologizes at the beginning. I'm like, no man, no. Don't give me 40 minutes, don't give me 50 minutes.
Yep.
Hour and a half is it's a good bookmark.
I'm with you on that one.
Got another hour to go then.
Yeah. But so long podcast. I try and make an absolute rule of wedging up the day before. So if I've got like 30 of an object to make, I don't want to come in and have to wedge it and weigh it.
Wedging up, explain that to us.
So I've got a bag of clay, which is like 12.5 kilos of clay. If I'm throwing a 250 gram cup, I need to get the bag of clay, get my scales, and cut, say, 30 250 gram pieces of clay. And I need to wedge every one of them. So just kind of kneading it to homogenize it in itself. Just to make sure the consistency is really even and there's no air bubbles in it. And so I will always, if I'm making cappuccino cups tomorrow, the last thing I do today will be to weigh and wedge all the pieces of clay for tomorrow, so that when I come in, I just turn the wheel on, take the plastic off the top of the balls of clay, set the pointer, and just pew, pew, pew. Which is wicked, because it's obviously making pots is a creative thing, but if you are just going to make like you can probably see in the back, there's lots and lots of little candle pots there. Yeah. There's like 150 of those, and they're all the same size and shape. That is not a creative act. That is like a technical act. You know, it's like chopping an onion. Yeah. Right? It's just hand movements over and over and over and over. And I suppose it's a creative act in like figuring out how to exactly make them as you want them to be. But once you've nailed that, it's just kind of like brain off, podcast on, throw the pots to the pointer.
But that's what Peter was saying yesterday. In fact, is that some days just give me something I can just carry on with, and I don't have to think too much about it. Because some days you need those. Yeah,
and also, like if I'm going to come in and do something like more sculptural or more decorative, you kind of there's a bit more pressure for like the muse to descend, you know. Like are the juices flowing today, and do I like it takes more emotional energy, I think, to be really, really creative. Where so it's really nice to. That's one of the reasons I think I was so drawn to pottery. Initially I was going to do a fine art degree, but if somebody says just make some art, I kind of go like, what? Like anything, literally anything. Like absolutely terrifying.
And we talked about exactly this with Peter the other day. It seems to be a common thing that we talk about with people. And I'm surprised not a lot of people know about this. Do you know about drawing on newspaper?
No.
Oh man, so this is my little gift to the makers community. It's like product design, draw on newspaper. If you can't get started, draw on newspaper, because there's something already on the sheet.
Okay.
So just draw on it. It's like
that's
looking
awesome.
at a blank piece of paper is really intimidating for a lot of people. So just scribble on newspaper. That's what the guys at Rapture and Right were saying. Like, watch this newspaper print coming out next. So, So I think a lot of people struggle with that same thing. And I suppose how do you get over that? How if it's just like, do you just fall back on a process day, or do you?
No. I try and make it kind of like schematic for myself. So if I'm like, okay, I want to make some jar forms and I want to do some slip work with them, I'll like define the form, and then I'll make like a very like a little map to follow. So I'm going to make like 8 of these jar forms, this exact size. I'm going to do like brushed work on 3 of them, and I'm going to do trailed work on 3 of them. And I've got these slips that I know that work, and I just make a little map, and then all I have to do is execute them. So I kind of, I try and like front load the creative bits.
Right.
But also in the same vein, I do then try and, like particularly with the PhD, the practical work that I'm making to like drive that research, is a more kind of, what would you say? The objects are kind of like propositional and exploratory. So I'm looking at different ways to approach pot making, which like draw out the more like embodied kind of material aspects of pots. So like really draw you into the making process behind the object.
Okay.
So like really dramatic, like brush marks or throwing lines or whatever it might be. So for those things where I do want to kind of be, I don't want to be too rigid. I kind of have to plan it. So I have to say on Friday afternoon, I will weigh up 8 pieces of clay and I will just do whatever I want with them.
Yeah.
But I have to kind of decide that in advance, right?
So you're not doing the iterative side or the creative side in sketch at that point. You're actually doing it in physical, in clay, throwing it up,
and
seeing where it ends up.
Yeah, and that would be very open-ended. But it's like I always joke with my friends that it's fine to not have a plan as long as I plan to not have a plan.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah, if there's a rigid plan in place and it goes awry, I'm like, I'm not a happy boy.
Yeah.
But if the plan is on Saturday we're going to meet up and do whatever we like, I'm like, oh, grand. As long as that's in my head
That's this
already.
guy.
Yeah.
That's this
Really?
guy.
Yeah,
Oh man, I can't if I've set a plan, if I've read book, I've got a shelf full of read books from all the different films I've done, and like every night the next day's lists on it, and if some call comes in or some other project comes in and it's off the plan, I'm just like, close the book, put it to the side, except there's now no plan.
Yeah, okay.
And for the longest time I found that really frustrating until I realised like it's okay not to have a plan, Jack.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Yeah.
So-
You're learning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, just about how you frame it, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I speak to people that don't do like creative things, and they think that like maybe art more so than craft is like fireworks in the sky, moments of inspiration, and you just like wait for the muse to descend and these awesome things happen. I'm like, it's a war of attrition. You just got to like keep turning up and keep planning, and I do like. If I have started something like just an idea that's purely on the wheel, just messing around, then it's really, you've got a starting point to go to a drawing, and then you can kind of back and forth between the two. And again, comes back to what I was saying, like if there's some object that's really interesting that you have made, drawing it is a really useful way to think it through.
Right, okay.
So you like focus on certain aspects of it, you know.
Mm.
So yeah, not like in the typical day of Bert the Potter, not loads of like completely free form making, but I think it's a really healthy way to end a week as well. If you've had like a busy week of just churning out objects in that very like brain off, podcast on way, it's really good to be like, okay, for 2 hours at the end of the week, you're just gonna do whatever you like.
You're not under pressure to do something. It's just like, oh, I'm just going to try it.
Yeah. And also, I think if the thing you love is your job, it's important to reinsert some playfulness, because it can become, you know, if I have to throw another 50 plates, I'm going to kill someone. Kind of thing.
One of the common things that seems to come up with makers, and it's kind of good that it's probably the most frequent I've heard anyone do it weekly, was Rapture and Write yesterday, and yourself, even just for 2 hours a week. A lot of makers, and again, it goes back to what you were saying financially, like we get drawn into, well, we need to make a living.
Yeah.
These are selling, so just keep knocking these out. And, you know, Cecilia mentioned in the documentary that one of her biggest goals this coming year is to set aside time just to be creative again, instead of keep making the same stuff. So is that something you've always done, or is it something that more recently you've made sure and made time for? And are you consistent with that? You know, do you make sure and make time for it every week, or is it a as and when?
No, I don't consistently make time for it. I suppose right now, like I'm just like the business in general, it's just got like a bit more traction. And so I like, it's just a massive privilege to be busy.
Yeah.
I'm just like, oh man, I can make these bots and actually shift them. And it's, I'm not complaining about that. If somebody wants me to throw 500 plates, just
Absolutely.
land in my inbox.
Yeah.
I'll make you 500 plates.
Right.
But
Have you ever done anything for like cafes or?
No, I
restaurants?
haven't done much retail wholesale work in general actually, but it's something I'm hopefully gonna do some retail next year. But I'd love to work with some little restaurants in South Wales. That'd be really lovely. But yeah, going back to the kind of inserting the time to be playful and free, because I did so much of because I had this 3 years of undergrad, there was loads of time. Like I wasn't thinking commercially at all then, and I would go to the throwing room and be like, okay, put like a overly like massive piece of clay on the wheel that I definitely couldn't throw, just mess around with it, and it's great. But as time went on and I became more commercially minded, and kind of became more, okay, today we are making coffee cups and breakfast bowls, whatever, then it's been important, I think, for me to, redress that, but don't just keep, slogging away in this kind of, remember that it's not just a job, it is like the thing you like the most in the world as well, which it really is. It's my favourite thing to do.
That's good.
Yeah.
And how have you taught yourself that not to be... That's a knife edge. And it's a knife edge a lot of people fall on the wrong side of in their day-to-day jobs and in their creative endeavours. Have you made a conscious effort to make sure that, or did you sway too far one way, sway too far the other way? You know, how did you approach that one?
So one thing that's nice is that the PhD work is kind of annexed from the commercial work. So those pots and that making time, which is like happening in like some kind of research framework, is not commercial in any way. So when I sit down to make those pots, there is no notion of like, if this handle isn't quite right, somebody might not buy it. So there's none of that commercial pressure exists. That being said, there's still kind of academic pressure. Like, is this project working? Is this project going forward? So it's good to have, like, it's very rare, but occasionally I'll make a pinch pot. So a pinch pot is like the most simple kind of pot you can make. You don't need any tools. Take a little ball of clay, squidge your thumb into the middle of it to make a little recess. And you just keep pinching around it and it'll just get thinner and it'll just kind of grow into a little bowl. And I do it very rarely and it's so therapeutic. And you can
so
do
no wheel at this point.
No.
Just
you could do it on the sofa, no water. It's not even messy. And I'm like, oh man. And I should like, so, and occasionally I'll like do a pinch pot and I'm like, right, I'm going to do one pinch pot every week because it's just so like, it just kind of grounds you in like the wonder of the material, I suppose. This like super malleable stuff that you can just pinch into an object.
Yeah.
So that's like, and I guess it comes and goes. Like I do build that time in sometimes, but like I say, recently I've just been really happy to be busy. I haven't long landed in this kind of here's my standard wear, time to churn a load of it out. Like it's all still relatively new, so it's got like a novelty and a joy in and of itself, I suppose. But yeah, the other thing is that I'm hoping to get a new studio nearer the kiln, and then this would just be like a little, like a recreational pottery as opposed to like
this is your pinch pot.
Yeah, exactly. Where I could come and sit on the kick wheel on a sunny Sunday morning with a cup of coffee and be like, all right, Bert, let's make a big weird pot that no one will ever buy, just for the love of it, you know.
Yeah, just because you can and you've got everything there.
Yeah.
So you mentioned obviously the pinch pot and the material and how versatile the material is. Is that what attracted you to the potting, or what did attract you to? What is it that when you threw that first pot you were like, yep, this is me?
Yeah, so it was very specifically the wheel. Like it was throwing, absolutely throwing. Like I'd coiled some pots and stuff, and like, so that's just like long thin sausages of clay, and you just kind of stack them on top of each other and smush them into each other.
Yep.
And like you build the wall up like that, and that was lovely and that was very therapeutic. But that was the thing that got me onto like I think I'd sort of seen some videos of people throwing on the wheel, and I was like, these coiled pots are okay, but I'd really like to have a go on the wheel. And I had to go on the wheel, and it was just like that super cliched like.
So it was a tool that you like to use.
Yeah, it was that process. Obviously, it has to be that material, but it was that process with clay specifically, and it's just so immediate and just like magically fluid. Like there's no other like rotational forming process that's the same. You've got like reductive ones, so like wood turning on a lathe or like milling a piece of metal.
Yeah.
But those are reductive and they're not transformative, right?
Yeah.
That's the insane thing about clay, this plasticity. And yeah, there was something about the throwing that was just so like take you out of your head, put you in your body. And I've always had like quite a busy brain anyway. So I think, yeah, and I was just like completely just like quiet my mind.
Yeah, you don't think about anything else. That's what you're doing.
Yeah, apart from if it goes wrong and then you're just completely furious and very
and
much
then
in your
you're
brain.
like,
Yeah. Immediately,
Yeah,
straight back down to earth. Yep, I remember who I was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it was that process, and yeah, throwing and then turning, which is like the secondary thing when your pot's firmed up a bit and you put it back on the wheel, which is reductive then. So you like trim clay away from the object you've already thrown.
So I don't know a lot about ceramics. So talk to me about that. So you've thrown it. It's not fired at this point. It's you let it room set and then go back on the wheel.
Yeah. So you work clay in different ways depending on the moisture content. So you can have clay in anything from liquid, which you'd call slip. So that's like very high hydration, loads of water and clay. You can literally pour it like into a mold or whatever.
Okay.
If then less hydration, it'll be like plastic clay. So that's like clay as you'd imagine it, like solid but very squidgy. So you can stick your thumb in it and pinch out into a pot or whatever. once you've, so like for instance this, you throw it when it's at that squidgy stage, and you can transform it from a lump of clay, you open it up and lift the walls, and you get this cylinder. Then you'd leave it out, say like overnight, depending on how humid it is, how hot it is, and it'll firm up to what you'd call leather hard or cheese hard. So enough moisture content has left it that it's not squidgy anymore. It's like got some rigidity, and you can put it upside down on the wheel, and you can like trim details into the bottom of it. You can take a little bit of the weight out. You can just like finish up the shape a little bit as well. And that's the point that you detach a handle as well when it's leather hard. And then once you've done all those things, you let it go bone dry. So you can't work clay basically at all when it's bone dry. It's super fragile.
Okay.
It's completely rigid. It's got, when it's leather hard, when I was saying you would trim it, it would still have a little bit of flex in it. Because it's still got just enough water in it to have some movement. But when pots are bone dry, they're just like, they would just crumble in your hand.
And this is bone dry. This is before it gets fired.
Yeah, then you biscuit fire it.
Right.
Biscuit firing being like first firing, where you take it to around 1,000 degrees. So at 573 degrees, you get the quartz inversion. So that's when you go from clay to ceramic. The difference being when you have your bone dry pot that's still clay, if you dump it in a bucket of water, it'll turn into silt. You can dry it out again, and you can just rework it. So you can recycle clay indefinitely. But once you've been through the quartz inversion at 573, it's ceramic, and it will no longer return to clay. So that transformation is immutable, basically.
Right.
And so there's this great video by an amazing Danish potter, and she's like, you have to take biscuit firing so seriously. Like, who are you to transform this clay into ceramic? Like, who are you to say this object is like, worthwhile to be like solidified forever, basically.
So that's a big, like, from a holistic point of view, it's no longer recyclable. That's a big point. That's now like, I'm happy with this, and I presume that's what she's trying to convey in the documentary.
Yeah.
Like, this is,
you should take it seriously.
Yeah, because this is now, it's dust. You can drop it and turn it into dust if you want. Like, you can break it, but you can't rework it after that.
Yeah.
Like, up until that biscuit firing point, you could just bang it back in water and rework it next week.
Yeah, so I like technicians in uni are just forever telling people, like, for the love of God, please don't fire everything you make, because invariably the first things you make will be complete rubbish. And obviously people get very attached to their first mug. Case in point, I've got my first mug by there, or like their first pot. But it's just, you could, if you have a very specific object in mind that you want to make, if you're going to make it 30 times before it's any good, so don't fire the first 29 of them. Fire like the best 3 or something. Make 30, fire the best 3, recycle the rest.
Really? Okay, so 10%.
I mean, I like the kilns and the technicians and the resource manager at university would certainly prefer that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And these hordes of orphan pots at the end of the year that nobody cares about and nobody picks up.
Aww.
So we got up to biscuit firing and firing it, so it's now a ceramic at that point.
Yes, ceramic object, exactly. So it's hard. If you flick it, it'll give you a little ping. Excuse me, a little ping. It's got like it's rigid at that point. Still kind of like chalky and soft. You could like abrade it, but then after that, you will glaze your object. So that's like dipping the biscuit fired pot, which is porous, into a liquid suspension of water and then minerals and oxides and rocks, basically. And so you have like a glass former, which makes the glaze surface, a flux, which is something that helps you melt that glassy surface, some clay, which helps keep the liquid on the pot as opposed to just running off onto the shelf, and then like any colorants or oxides that might like bring like surface qualities. And you can apply it in different ways, but lots of people will dip their objects. Okay. So you literally just like hold the pot, pour glaze in the inside and tip it out, and then dip it in the bucket.
It's fascinating.
And because the object is porous, it'll suck in the water and the glaze coat sits on the outside. Put it in a kiln, fire it again to higher temperature, depending on how you're working, what your material technology is. So earthenware is typically fired lower, anywhere from like 1,000 to 1,100 degrees, and stoneware can be anywhere from kind of 1,150, 1,200 up to about 1,300, which is what I'm doing in the gas kiln.
And do you typically only work in one or two types of glaze, or because you do a range of colours?
I do, but it's all so gas fired, so like reduction fired, you would call it. So because there's a flame in the kiln, you can get certain glaze effects because you can change the nature of the atmosphere in the kiln by like depriving it of oxygen, essentially. So gas fired stoneware lends itself very well to neutral, muted, natural kind of finishes, which is what I'm all about. So these kind of like toasty clay body colours, very kind of cool, calm, grey, blue, green, kind of like the speckle from the iron in the clay, but I'm using some slips. So those are like liquid clays with oxides in them, and slips in combinations with glazes, and you can get quite a lot of effects then out of quite a small number of things. So there's 4 glaze buckets in my glaze shed, and that's those 4 glazes combined with like 3 slips and 2 clay bodies, and you can get lots of different finishes basically.
And was that decision process driven or aesthetic driven? Did you build your kiln to suit that glaze, or did you pick that glaze to suit the kiln that was available to you?
No, so when I was getting into pots in uni, I would flick through glaze books to start like doing some glaze testing, and I'd be like, oh, that glaze is nice. Oh, it's gas fired. Oh, that glaze is nice. Oh, it's gas fired. Oh, this glaze is nice. Oh, look, it's gas fired. So I was immediately drawn to this very specific kind of thing, and so from that point on, I only really tested gas fired finishes. And then when I left uni, and when COVID happened, I was doing all my firing at uni, so I was still a student there, had no access to any kilns. I had this shed on lockdown, so I could make pots, but I had no means to fire them at all, which was really weird, not very motivating. I was like, I'm just going to make these pots, and they'll just sit
Can't
here
do anything with them.
doing nothing. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, until the time that we don't know when it is that lockdown lives.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
just years of hundreds of pots waiting to get.
But then, built a kiln at my parents' house just down the road. And that's one of the other nice things about gas kilns is that they are buildable. Like an electric kiln is not so simple because it's got the electronic aspect, but a gas kiln is basically a big box made of refractory bricks with 2 gas burners and a chimney. It's it's a relatively simple object. So built the kiln to facilitate that existing style of work that I was already making. It's just there's like loads and loads of experimentation to be done, and I've always got tests on the go, just like slowly in the background. But I really wanted to, again, like to come back to that commercial aspect. I wanted to lock in some finishes that were reliable and that I liked, so that I could work in some kind of like stable, ongoing commercial way, where somebody's like, oh, but I'd like another one of those flat white cups that I bought, and I can be like, well, great, here it is in pretty much the same shape and in the same glaze finish, and it'll match your other ones, and because I think that was just just made sense to me, I suppose.
That makes sense. So we've gone through, once they came out of the kiln and they're all glazed, is that them ready to rock and roll?
No, you've got to sand their bases.
Okay.
You don't have to sand their bases, but the kind of clays I'm using, like not super gritty, but a bit gritty. And if you put one of my coffee cups down on your lovely coffee table, hardwood coffee table, and slid it across to somebody, it might not do very nice things to the coffee table.
Right.
So I always just skim them over with a piece of sandpaper, just like quite heavy grit sandpaper. And just have a quick look at them, sand it over, and that's pretty much it then.
Love it.
Which leads us to Kate and I's pressing question for ceramicists.
Yeah.
How the hell
Packaging.
do you package it?
Yeah. So, this is something I've really got to get to grips with. Like I said, today is the first proper online shop, and I had priority access opened yesterday to all those in my mailing list. So I've already got some orders, which is great.
Amazing.
But I've had a few packaging mishaps in the past. Some broken pots, which is always the most depressing message to receive. Yeah. Just like picture of a broken pot of somebody like, oh, goddamn. So I have in the past been using, because my kiln shed is like a horse stable, there's straw, which much to my mother's dismay, I steal to package pots in. So I wrap them in like green friendly bio bubble wrap, and then pack them in boxes with loads of straw.
So for everyone that's watching this, it's like, oh, that's a really nice touch. You're like, it's just convenient.
Yeah.
It's next door.
Oh, yeah, it really fits the narrative, the potter with his straw. I actually had somebody recently be like, but you sent those samples and they're great, but the office is an absolute mess now because of all the straw that appeared from the box.
You should probably note, careful when you open.
Yeah, please open outside.
Yeah, that's it.
So actually, this guy that I mentioned earlier, Florian Gadsby, he's got this huge catalogue now of really great instructional videos on YouTube. And that's from everything from throwing a cylinder to pulling a handle to trimming a foot to apprenticeships that he's done and stuff. But one of them was specifically on wrapping pots for postage, and it's absolutely invaluable. And the test he does is he wraps up this mug and packs it and then just pelts it into the wall. The mug survives. The mug survives very happily.
Well, must have it down to a T then.
That's the gold standard.
Yeah, so and basically the principle is wrap the object in bubble wrap until you can't feel the object, right? So as long as there's no sign when you squidge the bubble wrap, you can't discernibly be there's the handle, there's the rim. and then when you put it in a good quality, like triple walled cardboard box, and then you have to fill it with packing peanuts, but you have to quite aggressively overfill the box and really ram the packing peanuts down. And then when you shake the box, if you shake the box hard, you shouldn't be able to hear anything. It should be completely stationary, trapped in the middle of these packing peanuts. And if you've done that, supposedly, says Florian Gadsby, your pots will be fine.
So either we're going to see angry Bert comments on Florian's
Yeah.
YouTube when he releases his first
Gadsby,
or we're going to hear it and it's all going to be great.
Do you ship abroad?
So this is, I'm done EU shipping this time, which I'm slightly apprehensive about because I know people are having trouble with all things Brexit related and EU troubles. So there's just a line in the shop and in every product description saying, please be mindful that if you're ordering from the EU, local duties and taxes may apply.
Yeah.
So I know people are getting stung basically. But I think people are aware, and I've tried to make it clear. Mm-hmm. And there hasn't been like loads of EU orders, but enough to make it like worthwhile for sure.
Good.
So, I mean, fingers crossed I won't.
Yeah, I
won't have
think
too much
certainly when we went back to EU shipping ourselves, we'd lost most of our custom.
Really?
From the EU. We lost about 85% of our EU custom overnight.
What with the publication? Like
with the
when Brexit
publication? Yeah. Well, overnight.
That's really sad.
Yeah, because we had a lot in France and Germany and whatnot, and like didn't see anything coming.
We had a huge readership in France.
Yeah.
Like the first Christmas we released, 1 in 3 orders was from France.
Which is
it was
quite
crazy.
Nice.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, and slightly miserable, obviously.
Yeah. It just disappeared.
That's really sad. Yeah.
But of late, this last 2-3 weeks, we've definitely noticed it climbing back up. So,
well, was it last year we got our own IOSS number, which meant that we could trade. So we collect all the tax, and then we pay the tax to the EU, whatever it is.
So we collect the
So-
customer's duty.
Yeah,
So they don't have to pay the duty. We pay all the duty when it goes in, and then we pay it direct.
it's an extra job, but you know it's.
But
worth
it's
it.
better for the customer experience
Yes,
ultimately.
absolutely.
Cool.
And we get the custom back.
Don't
so.
say things like that, guys. I'm not doing that. Everyone's going to pay their own
no.
duties for me.
This was like specifically for magazines or whatever thing that.
Yeah,
we
the
got.
IOSS number was specifically for.
Well, actually, I don't know.
I think it's for everybody, but the one we got was
Yeah.
specifically for publication.
Right.
It was a research thing we had to do. We're like, are we going to do this right?
But there's some crazy percentages
Yeah.
in some places in the EU, like way higher than our 20% VAT just on printed products. And
Well,
but
there's
a lot
no
of
VAT
them are.
in the UK for printed products.
Yeah, in the UK there's zero, and
But-
then there's quite a lot of countries are zero, but there's a couple that are just like wildly high.
Yeah. These are the kind of things, like, you know, earlier you were saying, like, it's great to do the creative bits, but it's all the business bits where we're all like, oh. And it's like things like EU shipping are the kind of things that I'm thinking about when I'm led in bed at night. I'm just like, I've got to deal with this. I haven't looked into it. I guess it's at the bottom of the list. Like, I really need to get up tomorrow and deal with this, look it in the face.
And it's purposefully at the bottom of the list because everything's more interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
That's little things. If you don't have a business, you don't think about, or if you're buying a product, you don't think about the other million things that person's having to do. For example, I forgot to get the barcode for edition 5 and I was up. What was I like? I couldn't sleep. I was like, I never got it. It's going to have to print tomorrow. Oh my gosh.
Should we put some context to this? You forgot to get the barcode like 24 hours. So previously one of our distributors used to get us the barcode. That's now no longer a service they offer. So it just wasn't on Kate's radar because our job list transferred for the previous two, and obviously barcode wasn't on that because he would deal with that.
Sure.
Super easy thing to drop. But Kate realised she didn't have the barcode as we drove to yesterday's podcast. Or no, the night before.
Night before.
Really
and then I
stressful.
couldn't sleep and I was
And it's a company in New Zealand that makes a barcode, so it's like, what time is it in Auckland, New Zealand?
So I was waiting until like 1 o'clock in the morning. I was like, I'm going to be asleep on camera tomorrow. It's just one of those little things that you have to buy the barcode and you have to get it done for each edition because it all scans different. So it's just one of these things that you just forget sometimes.
Yeah, and I think that's one of
done.
the big points about, like you say, you have to be a jack of all trades to do like any of these kinds of jobs. And one of the really annoying things that happened to me was I had one of the game changers I feel for like selling in person at fairs is digital card readers, right? It's absolutely the amount of custom that I wouldn't have got over the past like 3 years where people are like, do you take card? I'm like, oh yes I do.
Yeah.
Beep. And you're like, okay, great, fantastic. And obviously it just like streamlines everything in the most amazing way. So I had a square card reader, which is just like a little square thing where you put your pin in on the phone. And then I in my head I was like, you've got to check the card reader before you go just to make sure it's working, because obviously it's a crucial part of like the market vibe, right?
Yep.
You can't take payment, you're screwed. And I was just like, oh yeah, I'll do it. And I'm like getting ready for the show, and the show's like 3 days away. then it's the next day, and I'm like, I'm getting ready for like all my stall stuff, and like ironing my tablecloths, and making sure everything looks good. But, I've got to check the card reader, and I hadn't done it. Anyway, the next day, so maybe it was like the morning of the show, and I wake up and I'm like, just check the card reader before I go. And it like I try and connect the card reader to the phone, and it's like no longer compatible because the card reader's too old or whatever. And I was like, Bert, why have you done this? And then I'm like desperately like, I need to buy a new one, and it's like I need to be at this place in like an hour's time. And it just transpired that Argos just down the road had one of like the updated card readers. So like I blitz across to Argos, buy one, sat in the car park like trying to connect this reader, and I still to this day don't know what the problem was, but it just wouldn't connect. And I was just like, what am I going to do? Like, I'm completely screwed if I'm there all day. And very fortunately, my partner, who runs a florist in Rabina, had a spare like iZettle reader. So I just set up an iZettle account immediately. But it's like those, like you say, these little things.
Yeah, you just
and you're like,
sometimes it just happens, and
and
you roll with
you're
it.
like, you've made the entire publication, which is a mammoth task, and you're like, the barcode.
Yeah,
and it's just like
simple thing on the back, but it's quite important.
The whole thing. It's like a linchpin.
Yeah.
And there are so many of them.
Yeah, there is.
So you're sat in the car moments before you're due to open.
Yeah, just
connecting to iZettle.
Yeah.
Bringing your blood pressure down best
Yeah.
possible.
Get me a coffee.
Literally. So yeah, I'm a big fan of lists, paper lists in particular.
You're a
Red
list
book.
person.
Red moleskin.
Everyone knows it's yours though.
Squared red moleskin.
Is it red because you like the colour red, or because it's bright and it's easy to find?
It's red because it's bright and easy to find.
Yeah, nice.
What did you say? Somebody on the film set was like, "Oh, I know whose red book that is. He's left it here."
I've been on films, left them in stages, and it's made its way back to me.
That's amazing.
Without my address details or anything inside it.
Yeah,
They're like,
I'm
that's one of the effects boys, dropped it off in the effects. And then the last Louise in the office posted it straight back down to me. Because I worked from home and wasn't even on site. I'd obviously left it on site when I was last there. Made its way down to me. I was like, amazing.
So that's crucial. So I've got, like, I really like sketchbooks and I really like notebooks. And like I say, I do like sporadically, like quite obsessively, like draw stuff and try and like note take and catalogue things. But I've got loads of black notebooks and I never know which one to reach for, basically. I'm like, which one did I put it in?
Yeah.
So I just need the
colour.
Unify it in just one.
They
red
all go
one
on a shelf as they're done, in order. Write the name of the film and the date on the side.
Nice.
And then next one dumps in.
Happy days.
And then he gets annoyed when I write in his notebook.
She'll pick up one of mine and I'm like, whoa.
No.
Yeah, not happening. Yeah.
The one that somebody was
So
actually
I've got a
saying to me
green
the-
one now for We Are Makers. It's
Yep.
green.
Oh,
So we
very
know.
good.
Yep.
Right, colour coded. Yeah.
Someone was actually saying to me the other day, they're like, you're going to have to like buy 10 or 15 of these because if they're no longer available,
Yes,
what are you going to do? I'm
Well,
like,
you buy the exact same
Leave.
one every time.
Yeah.
exact same one.
Okay, nice.
And they're like, what are you going to do? Retire.
End of career.
End of
no
career,
more red
done.
books.
No more red
Wow.
books. So that'll be
Wow.
me. So we talked a bit about shows there. What does your show calendar look like? Are they quite important to you? Are they quite important to ceramicists in general, or?
So, I think historically they've been very important, particularly when digital commerce wasn't as common. And I think there's probably a solid demographic difference, from what I understand, between people that are going to buy pots at shows as opposed to people that are going to buy pots online. And obviously there will be crossover, but it certainly feels like a bit of a different demographic. When you do your final year at Cardiff Met on either ceramics or the maker course, and basically everybody either goes to art in clay or a London like more design focused event, which I can't remember the name of. But I went to art in clay, and you get like a discounted student stand price, and it's kind of your first time to like take your work out into the world a little bit. So I did that in 2018, and that was just a wicked experience. And then it came to be a bit of a joke because I did the BA stand the first year, I did the MA stand the year after that. Then the year after that, I was like, I'm a PhD student, I'll just go with the MAs. And I think I did it as a student 4 times maybe.
Nice.
I think eventually the organiser was like, but no more student stands for you, this is getting ridiculous.
Yeah.
But that was essentially the only like proper ceramic show that I was doing, and I was just doing it once a year as a student. And then I was doing like smaller markets around South Wales. So like little craft fairs and craft markets that were maybe like 20 to 50 quid for a table. So not like massive events, but they were very cheap to be at.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a good way, like earlier doors, to just kind of do some test trading, I think, like see how the pricing was working and see how the demand for the pots were. And then as I was ramping things up a bit, I started to feel like the price point had increased a little bit, and I felt like the quality of the work had increased a little bit, and I think it wasn't quite making as much sense for me to be at some of these smaller things where I wasn't really like it just didn't really work as a setting for what I was trying to do. But every year I was going back to this show, Art in Clay, which was in Hatfield, but it's now in Windsor. And there it was more kind of, I was getting to the standard of Art in Clay every year when I was going as a student, kind of like getting closer to like the general standard there. And then at the beginning of this year, I did my first like non-student show, and that was by a company called Potfest in Blind Place, which is like a big, beautiful country house outside Brighton.
Lovely.
So I was like in the van driving there, like slightly terrified. I was like, oh, this is the first like non-student one. Don't know anybody that's going to be there. Paid full whack for the table. I need to sell a lot more pots to actually make any money. But lovely potters, lovely event, great organizer, really good time. And I think there's some potters that do like six to eight of these shows a year.
Yeah.
And you have to produce huge amounts of work. And it's quite a long slog. Like they're normally like 4 days. You're camping, long days selling the work, which is really exciting and really like, it's lovely to engage with people. And it's really exciting when people are complimentary and people are taking pots home. But it's also like just a big energy drain. Like you're wiped at the end of one of these days.
Yeah.
So the people that do like 6-8 of them a year, I have no idea where they have the energy. But because I'm only really potting part-time, I've never had the stock to kind of do that many of them. But still, this year was the first time I've done 2. So I did Potfest at the beginning of the year, and I've just done Art in Clay. And I'm doing this online shop that launches tonight is kind of my first like testing the water for the digital model. So yeah, I think lots of people are working across real life shows and the digital thing.
Yeah.
I don't think I would ever write off the shows because they are so enjoyable.
Yeah.
It's a really nice thing to do.
Well, people can actually physically hold and see. I think that's important.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I guess you don't struggle with that, like online, because some people are, say for the publication, some people don't realise how thick it is or the quality of it until they actually have it in their hands.
It's true. Yeah, sure.
It's very sometimes hard to,
sell it as an object as opposed to content. Yes. Yeah. And I think the digital thing, I think like the people that are going to buy on my online shop are people that have been following me for a while, so they're already invested in that sense.
Yeah.
Whereas you, like a complete stranger, might buy a pot at a fair, but they get to meet you and they get to pick the pots up and they get to, they get that experience in a different way. But I'm a pretty social dude anyway, so I'm very happy to be on a stall and to meet people and to chat pots, and it's really nice. But I think maybe if I were to do, if I could do like some wholesale every year, like a couple of big wholesale orders every year, one in-person show and one online shop, I think I'd be pretty set.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of goal that I'm working towards now.
It's a good goal.
Yeah, I think so. And I think everybody falls foul of like, again, going back to like just getting paid when you're starting out. Every email and direct message that appears, you're like, yeah, I'll make you that. Yeah, I'll do that for you. Doesn't matter what it is or how worth your while it is. You just say yes to everything. And now I'm trying to, like, once you have a bit more demand, you can try and be a bit more like tactical and strategic and discerning with what you're going for, because
you can't do it all.
No, and also if you're just doing like one teacup for someone, as lovely as it is, if somebody wants a teacup, if you've like back and forth with them a few times, and like by the time you've actually made the object and sent it off, the amount of money you're getting paid for that is,
so your hourly rate's dropping massively.
Yeah.
And it's, I mean, yes, of course, we'd always love people to be, I'd like this, and you make that very specific thing for it, but it isn't feasible. It's not feasible to do that all the time.
No. And yeah, it would be lovely to, I'm not like business minded, and if I won the lottery, I would very happily just make pots and give them away for free. That would be great.
Yeah.
But alas, that is not the status quo at the minute. Yeah. But yeah, so yeah, to answer your question, I guess there's lots of potters that really love the kind of show run every year, and they're very well known at the shows, right? So there are collectors that will just come back for them. So like the shows are typically Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Friday is the collector day. So you'll get, the people will come first thing on Friday because they get the scope of get choice of all the work.
Right. Okay.
And they'll just make a beeline to whoever it is they collect, and they like buy whatever pots they want.
It's nice to have fans, isn't it?
Well, yes, I can imagine it is. Yeah.
I was going to say, have you got any wild collector yet?
Alas, no. I've got some really lovely people that I've seen like year on year at Art in Clay, which has been just really, really lovely, really kind of overwhelming experience to have somebody come back and be like, hey, we bought a pot last year, we absolutely love it, really happy to see you here again. Those kinds of interactions, just like, absolutely wicked. And this year at Art in Clay, I had a few people that appeared from the Instagram ether. They were like, Bert, we follow you on Instagram.
Yeah,
and
so that was nice.
It was so nice, to have like, oh my God, it's a person. It's a real life person.
Finally, Instagram is quantifiable. Someone's made it here.
Yeah,
those 15 photos, 30 photos to put one post is working.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think you've got to be around a lot longer to have that kind of collectibleness. And I suppose it depends on what kind of work you make as well. So I definitely want to kind of upscale and make some kind of bigger signature statement pieces, still within tableware, like massive chargers or like massive jars, massive storage jars. I'm really keen to make some big pots. But I think you have to kind of do your time and be a bit more patient before you're selling those like much higher price point, much bigger objects.
Yeah, it just takes time.
Yeah, exactly.
And then, so people that may come back to you at the show, so say you bought a couple of plates and then you want to then expand that range, you don't time out any of your stuff, do you? We talked about this, we touched on it briefly earlier, like nothing's timing out. You're obviously getting better as time goes on, but they're still all going to sit in a range, If I bought 4 plates and needed another 4, it's not a whole new 8 that I'm going to do. You're still doing the same colours, you're still doing...
Yeah, so the colours are never going to... like the cup you had your coffee in is kind of my my very standard, it's kind of like OG Bert the Potter vibe, which is like a really, really simple, clear, like Bernard Leach 4321 glaze, and it just gives you this grey blue with the speckle from the clay body, and like I will be using that indefinitely. I still am distinctly not bored of it. So all of those, there's always going to be these staples, and then hopefully around that I can kind of like embellish with like little, like I'll do a batch of like, well, here are these same flat whites or pasta dishes or whatever in a particular finish, which I'll do a little run of, but I'll try and always have that kind of core. But I won't, I guess ultimately that's the lovely thing, is that if I've made a certain kind of dinner plate for 4 years, it is within your right as a studio potter to say, well, I'm done with that now.
Right.
Although I imagine, I like to think anyway, that even if the style did change, you'd be able to buy them and put them on your table together, and actually they'd still be Bert pots and they'd still resonate.
Yes.
So I can understand if people are really particular about having the identical thing, I can understand why that'd be frustrating.
But handmade's always different, it's never going to be exactly the same.
No, and I suppose, while... So yes and no in answer to your question. There will be continuity, but I will change it up as well.
Yeah.
And I guess that's one of the nice things about like batch producing objects.
Fab. And then the kiln. We've talked a lot about you making the kiln.
Yes.
So obviously from an engineering background, this is a bit that excites me.
Okay.
You want to just go into depth on that? So it's not here. It's not in your studio here. You've got a small kiln here for...
Top loading electric kiln for biscuit firing.
Yeah. You couldn't do the glazes in that?
No.
Right.
Because you can't get this reduction atmosphere. You need the flame. You need some kind of live flame. So also it's a nightmare... the bone dry finished pot, which hasn't been biscuit fired, is extremely fragile. So to box all those up and take them down the road is much more precarious. So it's much easier to biscuit fire them and then transport them. But so the kiln is, there are a number of really good books on kiln building. There's one by Fred Olson, I believe, and there's one by Joe Finch called A Brick by Brick Approach, which I bought, which was very useful. And then there are loads and loads of lovely potters that have built kilns who are always just very generous with their knowledge. I had help off a guy called Brian Dickinson, who is an unbelievably knowledgeable and lovely human being. And he'd built a gas kiln at a place called Kigbeer in Devon, where there's a giant wood kiln, and a friend there said, this guy Brian Dickinson built our kiln for us. It's absolutely awesome. If you need to speak to someone about gas kilns, speak to Brian. So I spoke to Brian and we kind of discussed how to approach it. So it's very much not like, you don't just say, I'm going to build this kiln. It's like, what space do you have? What cash do you have? What kind of quantities of work are you making? If you have like a behemoth of a kiln that takes 500 pots to fill it, it's going to take me like half a year to fill it or something.
Right.
So if somebody says, Bert, can we have 40 coffee cups for our shop? Say, yeah, but you can have them in 18 months, right? So if you've got a slightly smaller chamber, it's slightly more manageable. The space I had to put it was a shipping container. There's a shipping container that was at the yard, and my mum was like, if you want to put a kiln in the shipping container, I was like, oh my God, yes please.
Yeah.
And it's kind of perfect because it's a lockable fireproof box, which is what you want.
Ideal.
Yeah.
So I had that kind of stock. I think a shipping container is maybe like 3 meters wide ish, something like that. And so based the size of the kiln off like the clearance you would need around it. And then the construction, and again, a lot of this input was off this guy Brian Dickinson, you need, like, if your kiln is well insulated, it's easier to get it to temperature, right? And getting to temperature is the crucial thing. And so what a lot of people will do is one skin of refractory bricks. So these bricks, HTIs, I think they're called, are like a very chalky, kind of limestoney looking brick, which you can literally, like, you can rub them together and they'll like crumble and you'll take the edges off and stuff. All they do is reflect heat, and they do it very, very well. And a lot of people will go one skin of these HTI bricks and then things like ceramic fibre on the outside, so you like give that second layer of insulation with other materials. And that's often done because the bricks are a bit more expensive than things like fibre and board. But I just did 2 layers of bricks. So you do like a higher grade brick inside and a lower grade brick outside. It's a very, very simple construction. It's very efficient. It keeps in heat like nobody's business. And you do the inside layer of bricks on their wide face and the outside face of bricks on their thin face. And the lower grade bricks on the outside are a bit cheaper anyway. So it's literally a brick box, 2 layers thick everywhere, including in the floor, which is sat on a heat-proof board, which is sat on big breeze blocks, which is sat on a concrete pad. So concrete pad, breeze blocks, heat-proof board, kiln. And then the arch of the roof of the kiln is sprung, so you have to have metal work around the edges of the kiln to brace either side of the arch. You have slanted bricks, which are called skewbacks, and then you have this arch which comes over the top, which is self-supporting then.
Nice.
So it's all cut in old school bridge style, keystone in the top. They're all cut in, remove one, it would all fall to bits, but with all them in, weighing in, all keep them together.
Yeah, exactly. And it's the tension from the metalwork that keeps it all in place. And then you have to have a chimney which is big enough to provide enough draw for the burners. So the other thing with gas kilns is they're either aspirated, naturally aspirated, or non-naturally aspirated, I suppose. So basically, you either have an air blower forcing air in with the gas to get you the like levels of heat and combustion you need, or if you have a big enough flue and you have the right size burner ports, the kiln will just naturally draw the air in with the gas. So if, like me, you don't have electricity, you don't need a blower, and then you just have a bigger chimney and you get the flue. And also you have a Venturi kiln box, a flue, which is like basically you expand and constrict the flue exit to get pressure. Yeah, you probably know better than me. So it was those kinds of details that Brian was really invaluable for.
How long did that take you to make?
That took me, I reckon, maybe a month. But if you had all the materials there and you'd done it before, you could do it in 2 days, I reckon.
Okay.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because you dry lay all the bricks as well. Like there's no like refractory cement involved. That's what was so appealing about it to me. It was such a simple thing. Like I could take it down and I could move it when eventually I moved studio. So the whole thing just really fit the bill for me.
Perfect.
Yeah, and like I say, it's quite a simple thing. Like the fanciest bits of it are the burners, probably the burners that I bought.
Just propane gas?
Yeah, propane bottles, about 1 bottle of firing. So obviously I'm, just forever worrying that the price of gas is going to like quadruple in a month or whatever.
So buy your pots now.
Yeah, buy your
before
pots
it goes up, because they're going to go up big time.
Yeah. Well, no, I'm quite lucky. Like one firing is maybe 1 bottle of gas right now. So I've always got 4 bottles on the go. So you've got excess fuel and you've got more pressure. So I've got 2 banks of 2 bottles.
Yeah.
But yeah, the kiln build itself, it was slightly terrifying. And the first firing itself, absolutely terrifying.
I can imagine you'd be like, is this going to go right or wrong?
Well, yeah, I'm just, am I going to blow it up? Is it going to work? Have I built it correctly? And like really surreal when it's like at 1300 degrees. And I'm just there like, I'd only ever done it with a technician in a uni before. I'd never even lit the burners myself before. You're not allowed to do it.
Quite brave.
Well, I mean, you say that, it just felt very foolish at the time. But yeah, and the first firing, I'll keep my language clean. I made a mess of, basically, and I had to refire the entire thing.
Oh, no.
But it was a good learning curve though.
So when you say refiring it, did you have to remake all the pots, or
no?
So you can refire.
You can refire pots, yeah.
Right.
Basically, I just didn't get it to temperature. Normally, I was firing to cone 9, which is 1280 in uni. So when I say cone, to measure temperature in a kiln, you have a pyrometer, which is like a probe that sticks in through the roof of the kiln. And that comes to a digital readout. And what that tells you is localized temperature in one place. So the probe might say 1280 degrees, but actually the heat work, which is, as it sounds, like the energy put into the pots by the heat present in the kiln, might vary, so it might be more or less than whatever the pyro is saying. So you have these things called pyrometric cones, and it's like a little cone of clay that you put in the kiln. It sits like that at an angle, and they have a chemical content in them to bend at very specific quantities of heat work. And when they touch down on the surface, if you have a 1280 cone and it's there, you know that that's exactly what the pot's on that shelf at least. That's the amount of heat work that they've received.
Okay.
That's really cool.
Yeah, so you never go just on the pyro, particularly for glazeware. You're always using the cones. And the cones give you a true representation of how much heat work the pots have had.
And are they a reusable thing? Do they reset?
Oh,
no.
And they are woefully expensive as well.
All right.
Yeah, but you only need a couple of firing. Like have one ish in the top of the pack and one ish in the bottom of the pack because you get a difference in temperature.
Yeah.
So I was normally firing to cone 9 in uni in a much smaller kiln, which was aspirated, and my glazes were always coming out fine. In this bigger chamber, I don't really know why the difference was there, but I needed to go a cone higher, so cone 10, which is 1300 degrees. And yeah, so the first firing I did, I got cone 9 down and I unbricked the door and everything was massively underfired. Well, when I say massively, like maybe 20 degrees in the top, like 30 or 40 degrees in the bottom. So instead of glassy and glaze-like, really matte, really sugary, not matured is what you'd say. So you need that top temperature for everything to actually really melt and become like glassy and glossy with these kinds of glazes. Anyway.
And that's what gives you that sort of shine hard coat on the end.
Yeah.
Is that top temperature.
Yeah, so again, if that was 20 degrees cooler, it would look, sugary and matte and weird.
Okay. So what sort of size are you looking at for your kiln? Well, 2 questions. What's the difference between naturally aspirated and turbocharged kiln?
Yeah.
And what difference does it give you? And what sort of size are you looking at for your kiln? And what does that mean in relation to pot? You know, we obviously said if you've done a massive one and it's 500 pots, can you put less pots in that? Can you? How does that all work?
Good question. So for you to, firstly on the size of the kiln, so because I need this reduction atmosphere, so I need to like starve the kiln of oxygen. If you don't have like a relatively full kiln pack, you'll get patches of oxidation. So you'll get like patches of the kiln which don't reduce. That's what we call it. So basically at 1,000 degrees, you push the flue in a little bit. I've got like a damper in the flue. So you push the damper in and you like cut some of the draw. And what that means is it's basically very inefficient burning. So the fire is looking for more oxygen. And I think maybe people misconstrued the chemistry a little bit, but I always understand it as you like draw oxygen out of the clay and out of the glaze. So all my like grey blue colours would be like quite yellow, but you're like changing the iron and like you're changing things in the glaze and in the body you're like pulling oxygen out of them essentially. That's what this reduction atmosphere does. So when you put the kiln into reduction, if you open the spy hole to look in the kiln, you'll get flame pop out the spy hole immediately because the flame is finding oxygen, right? Right. So the flame is like starved of oxygen. So I couldn't only half fill the kiln because the glaze effect wouldn't work. You have to fill it. And also it would be just inefficient. Yeah. You'd have to pay for a whole firing. And so you always want to fill it basically. You can have it like a little less full, but you still want it like pretty evenly full top to bottom. Also size-wise, if you have a really small kiln, then you can't make biggish pots. But that's, I think not so much of a consideration. And then with the naturally aspirated or turbocharged, the main thing is...
I really hope that sticks in the pottery world now. The turbocharged kiln.
I'm building a turbo kiln, the main thing is the speed with which you can fire. So you can fire really fast, is the impression I get, with aspirated kilns, because you can you can crank the gas and crank the air, and very literally, as you say, turbocharge the whole situation. So you can climb very, very, very fast, which is probably more efficient overall because you probably use less gas. But yeah, I mean, it's like it takes me 9 hours to fire. That's fine by my. I lie in a hammock in the back of the van, read my book, and do some PhD work. Yeah.
So is there a other than efficiency or time or speed? You know, if you're trying to crank out loads, is there anything that happens chemically to your glaze if you're firing it faster? Or are you putting them in from the start, or are you getting the kiln up to temperature and then loading? How does that work?
No, stone cold when you put them in.
Stone cold.
Yeah. So stone cold, and it's got like you brick up the door. So literally just like a section of the front of the kiln and bricks, and stack all the pots in there on kiln furniture, which is just like big flat shelves made of very refractory clay. And yeah, pack it all in there with your cones in line with where the spy holes are in the door. So that's like a brick you can take out to look at the cones. Then I'll like candle the burners, so just light them low to start warming through the chamber, brick the door up while the burners are on low, and then I just slowly turn the gas up as the day goes on. And then when I'm about 1,000 degrees, then you set the reduction, so push the damper in on the flue, get this reduction atmosphere, and then you just want a slow, steady climb up from 1,000 to about 1,300 in this reduction atmosphere. And if you set it correctly, you don't really need to mess around with it. You just check it every half an hour, make sure it's climbing as you want it to be, make sure it's still reducing as you want it to be. And like the first 10 to 15 firings were relatively stressful experiences. Even though like number 3 to 15 all went relatively correctly. I did have one where I had to steal a bottle of gas from my parents' heating system.
No,
really stressful, yeah.
I'll give you a bit. I'll replace it, I promise.
Yeah, well, this was literally, I was like, the gas was meant to arrive on the day, and now I will never start firing unless I have all the gas there, because the gas never arrived, as you can probably guess. But yeah, and so now it's actually it's just an early start, but it's like a relatively stress-free day. But I'm on firing, like I think the last one was 18. So yeah.
Man, did I have any more kiln questions? Probably loads. But without boring everyone and geeking out.
I mean, you're very welcome to come and have a nosy later.
Yeah. I think we might do that, actually. That would be good.
So just like for any like maker who's wanting to become or do what you're doing,
yes.
Like I don't really know much about like starting a ceramic business or potter business. Like, is it expensive or can you start off relatively?
No, the setup is hideous for ceramics.
Oh gosh.
If you would, yeah, sorry. No, well, it's one of the biggest barriers to entry actually. And so you have to be thrifty, and you have to and this is why I make pots in this this shed which I built with my old man where I live. Right, so there's no overheads on this apart from the overheads of living in the house.
Yeah.
And it's why a lot of people start off in communal spaces which have got shared kilns, because kilns are one of the other massive things. If you were to buy a brand new wheel, a brand new electric kiln, and a brand new gas kiln of the size I have, you'd be maybe talking like over 40 grand.
Oh wow!
Really? Okay.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah, if you buy a brand new wheel, easily like 1,500 quid. You can get like more basic wheels for like probably 500 to £1,000. The very first wheel I had in here was the kick wheel over there that the camera's on. That was, as you can see, it's quite long in the tooth. It's got that bespoke memory foam duct tape cushion, which I'm very fond of. That was £20 on Gumtree, I think. And
that's kick. That is
because it's a kick wheel.
You kick the wheel as it goes.
That's my left leg just kicking all day. And that I've only had this electric wheel 6 months, so the majority of the pots that you'll see on my Instagram came off that kick wheel. So yeah, that's, you've got to be thrifty essentially, and yeah, just lots of secondhand things. The top loader I have was given to me by an extraordinarily kind potter called Molly Curley, who actually set up the Makers Guild in Wales. So there's a place called Craft in the Bay, and that was founded by Molly Curley. And it was a really strange turn of events because she's my fiance's grandma's like good friend and colleague. They used to teach together at Cardiff.
Small world.
Really small world. And yeah, so Molly was, I think, in her 90s, and she decided to completely stop making pots, and very, very generously
in her
gave
90s
me.
she stopped.
Yeah.
Wow.
Amazing lady, absolutely amazing lady. So yeah, and that was super kind of Molly. And then built the gas kiln, which is not cheap, but it's much cheaper than buying a kiln.
If you can do it yourself, then
Yeah. And I'll put like a full material schedule and like all my photographs and all my plans and all the costings for that. That will go up on my website at some point as well. So anybody else who wants to build,
that'd be very useful for people who are thinking about doing the same.
Yeah. But yeah, otherwise, like shared studios are a really good way to go. And yeah, like outside of that, I think the main advice is like to really aggressively oversimplify it. Is you have to make good things and show them to people. That's the central thing, right? I think you have to.
You can't just keep it to yourself. You just need to show people what you're making.
Yeah. If you've got the best marketing in the world and the objects are no good, it's not going to work. If you've got the best objects in the world and absolutely no marketing, that's also no good.
Yeah.
So you need to find some, and I think also, weightlifting coach who's a good friend and a remarkable human called Justin Holly told me that, like, I started doing teaching at uni, like teaching people to throw, and he's like the most extraordinary coach, just generally coach, just really understands people. And he told me to let my nature be my guide, were the words he used.
Okay.
But it's really resonated with me because, like, for instance, if you're really introverted, going and doing shows is not a good way to start selling work because you have to be a people person.
Yeah.
So go for the online thing. You know, if you're really meticulous and organized and introverted, sit at home, quietly make your pots and like make your digital empire or whatever. You have to find ways of working which actually work for you.
Yeah, don't stress yourself out trying to be like that person on
No,
Instagram
if that
because it doesn't work for you.
Exactly.
And it won't work.
Yeah, and I think with, like you said, like what marketing do I do earlier? Like Instagram was just something that really fitted for me. I was like, this is free, accessible, and I can just quietly do it on a daily basis. And it just like really fitted with my lifestyle and my character. And so, yeah, that like, you've got to find ways to work that you will actually do, right? Like you say, trying to be someone else is just no good because you're trying to fit yourself through a hole that you don't fit through.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
I'm going to go straight back to the wheel question there. So is there a massive difference between being on the kick wheel versus the electric wheel, other than ease? But I mean, in the output of work, is there people that are maybe very mature in their career that could easily have an electric wheel that would stick to a kick wheel?
Yes.
Is there a traditionalist versus modernist approach in pottery?
Yes, yeah, massively. So there are different kinds of kick wheel. So that is, I believe you would call that a treader wheel because of the way it's set up, but it's also kind of a momentum wheel. So because it's the kick arm, but it's connected to that big heavy metal wheel. So once you've got it going, because the wheel is very heavy, it's quite easy to keep going. So you don't need to kick hard, especially when you're making small pots.
Yeah.
You just got to keep your leg going. And also it's very quiet. There's like a kind of really classic Leach treadle wheel, and they've got chains on them, and they're really light. So they actually like clank, 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 clank. Drive me mad. I have no idea how people use them, but they're quite like an institution, those wheels. But yeah, so the main things are, when you've got an electric wheel, you've got all this force available to you. So people have a tendency just to put their foot down. You're using loads and loads and loads of wheel speed. And if you're using loads of wheel speed, depending on how you're moving your hands, you're less likely to get like big kind of gentle gestural marks. If you're using a wheel really, really slowly, you'll get like big making marks, big slow spirals in your work. So it will change the aesthetic, but also quite importantly, because whenever you do anything on a kick wheel, you slow the wheel down a bit, it makes you more efficient, basically. So you can faff around with your pot indefinitely on an electric wheel because you've just constantly got it spinning. But if you're trying to get really regimented with your throwing and say, okay, like there's amazing potters that will do everything in three pulls, right? So you like, once your clay is opened, the entire formation of the pot is just three moves, basically.
So a pull is a move from bottom to top of the pot.
To create height and also to shape. And they'll do everything they make, doesn't matter how big, in 3 pulls, which is extraordinarily difficult. And so, yeah, it's much easier to... It's kind of like... what's it called when you box with like really heavy gloves or like a really heavy bag or something?
I have no idea. One of my brothers would know, but
same kind of principle. It like, you have to be more disciplined and you have to work a little bit harder in general on kick wheels. But I think they're fantastic. I really like having both.
Gives you the option, I suppose.
Yeah, and you also...
do you still use that option? Do you still jump back on?
Yeah, I do. Not like if I've got loads of things to churn out at speed, it's great to have this. Also, it's great just to have 2 wheels if you're working in 2 different clay bodies, because you're recycling everything, you need to keep all the recyc separate. So if I've got like a white stoneware in that one and a buff stoneware in this one, which is like more iron rich, you don't have to mix them in the trays, and then
So even when you're cleaning out the trays and recycling, you couldn't just mix them. It would be...
you could, but like the glaze outcomes I'm getting are very clay body specific, so I want to keep the clay bodies exactly as they are to get the different outcomes. So that's the other thing about the gas kiln, is that they're slightly more responsive to what the chemical content of what's underneath the glazes. So that leach clear glaze will only go that colour on that clay body because there's iron in it. If you put it on a grey stoneware that's got less iron, it'll be much paler. It'll be like a very pale blue, as opposed to that kind of like darker
so the
grey
glaze isn't standalone.
No, that glaze is clear. It's not blue. The blue is from the iron in the clay body underneath it.
Right.
That glaze is the same as this glaze, but this has got an iron slip underneath it, so that's like a liquid clay with 20% iron oxide in it, and that's what makes it go dark.
Oh, wow.
So it's all much more reactive. That's the thing about the gas kiln for me, is that you get it does a lot of work for you. And I did like a mini apprenticeship with a potter called Mickey Schlossink in the Gower. If you've got time, if anyone's in the Gower, in North Gower, in Cheriton, I highly recommend you going there. It is possibly my favourite place in the world. It is idyllic beyond belief. But she's a wood-fired salt glaze potter. So wood kilns and salt glazing as well. So stoking
Sounds amazing.
is really extraordinary.
Yeah.
Cannot recommend highly enough. And you get these amazing kind of atmospheric finishes because the salt becomes atmospheric in the kiln. It lands on the pot and it creates the glaze. You don't have to put the glaze on the pot. The salt does it for you. But she did a lot of works with slips. So she had not many glazes on the go and she was doing all these amazing things with slips. And it really stuck in my mind that if you've got a few slips and a few glazes and a kind of reactive, combustible-based environment, you can get all these different things happening for you.
Nice.
Exciting.
Yeah, we just segued aggressively from... We were talking about clay bodies, weren't we? Yeah, so it's great to have multiple wheels, basically. And I do really like kick wheels. You can also get momentum wheels. So momentum wheel, instead of having the arm that you kick, it's just a big disc, and you literally just kick it round with your foot. You just kick the top of the disc. And
like flywheel underneath it.
Exactly,
and
you just kick the flywheel. And you can get heavier ones and lighter ones. And they're lovely to work on as well, because they're... again, this lady in the Gower, Mickey... She used to work almost entirely on a momentum wheel, and it was just silent in the studio. It's so nice. Whereas these, you turn them on, especially one with a bad bearing. There's a few in Cardiff Met in the throwing room, and I had a friend in third year, and she was so particular about always using this one wheel, and it had a really, really, really worn bearing. I don't know if it was like something in the belt, but anyway, you turn it on. Donk, 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 along with like, it's like a helicopter taking off every time. It's like, Alina, please use a different wheel, please.
Swap them round.
Yeah.
Honestly,
literally.
it's the same one. They must have just changed the
Oh,
belt.
no, she'd know.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Is that something potters can be quite particular about then? Like sticking to their wheels, do you find that once you're set in your ways, everyone will be different, of course, but like you find this wheel or somebody finds that wheel, that style glaze, and that's just what they stick with?
Yeah, I mean, everybody's different, but I think people do... If you're going to do any ceramic... if you're going to make any ceramic objects, in like a... What word should I use? Like, basically, to do anything in ceramics, you need to be relatively particular, particularly if you're going to have repeatability, and if you're going to get some control over these material processes. They're just pretty involved. Like we said for the cup, right? You have to choose the clay, weigh the clay, wedge the clay, throw the clay, dry the clay, trim the clay, biscuit fire the clay, glaze the clay in some way, fire the clay in some way. And when you concatenate all those decisions together, this is why, like, you could give somebody exactly the same... You could put a different potter in my studio and tell them to make the same object, and it would never look quite the same.
Yeah.
Right? But you're always going to have to be pretty particular to have some control of your outcomes. Although there's some things I think, like it's like even with tools, like I've got so many tools here, and I probably use about 8 of them on a regular basis.
Just in case you need another tool, you've got it.
Yeah. But it'll be like I'll spend 6 months and it'll just be like, oh, I'll only use 2 turning tools. And I'll be like, oh, actually, I'm just going to use that other one. And I'll be like, oh, okay, I'll use that one for the next 6 months. And there's no real reason or rhyme to it, I guess. One of the big things for me going from that kick wheel to this electric wheel was the posture is slightly different. This one is just a bit taller. And
it looks quite tall.
The wheel is a bit higher relative to the seat, and I never ever had any troubles with my back on that wheel. And this wheel is just slightly more hunched over, and I've been having murder with my back just because that tiny difference in posture.
Interesting.
Yeah, so there are quite a lot of these. If you're going to spend a lot of time doing anything, I guess these things like start to shout at you a little bit more.
Yeah. Notice them.
Yeah, and there are things like doing the reclaim I do. So I have these big slop buckets, and you take all the leftover clay and you just cover them in water and slake them down so they become sloppy, and you put them on plaster bats to dry them out. And then when it's at the right consistency, you just wedge it back up. So you just literally knead it into itself for ages to homogenize it. But if I've got a lot of reclaim, it's like a full day's work of just wedging clay. And what at some point I would like to get is a pug mill, which is a machine that does this for you. You just like ram the clay in the top of it, and it's got like blades, and it'll have like de-airing vacuums, and you just get perfect throwable clay at the other end.
We were, I think they had one of them in Norway. So Kate and I spent 6 months studying out in Norway, and we never played with ceramics much.
Yeah, I saw this in your you were talking it's the origin story of the of the publication, right?
Yeah, it was Norway was a big
We spent.
inspiration.
So Kate's a home bird, so didn't really want to go to do the Erasmus exchange. I was kind of fed up with product design in general and the sort of studio setting of it, because it wasn't as mechanical as I wanted it to be. It wasn't as hands-on, and I felt that I needed. And it's absolutely not that I'd learnt everything, because that's not the case. But I felt I needed the next push.
Were you BA or BSc?
BDes.
Oh, okay.
BDes. So it was very design focused. But when we went over there, it was BSc. So they were very like hands-on, work out focus. And yeah, this Norway opportunity came out for us to go and do stuff. And
it was the best 6 months.
Oh,
like,
man,
I'm so glad I decided to go.
They had a wood shop. It was gargantuan. They had a metal shop that was gargantuan. They had a whole room, maybe 3 times the size of this shed, that was just set up with a forge in the middle. And it was wicked.
Jack, like, you made axes when you were
done
there.
axes, knives, the whole lot. We studied with this. Einar was his name, and he was one of the lecturers, and the smallest, frail-looking guy, but Jesus Christ, with a hammer in his hand. Wow. He was a machine. And so he taught me a bit, and we've done a bit of that. And getting back to the pug mill, I'm sure they had one of them in, and like the clay comes out really warm, and it's all like a perfect slug, and it's super satisfying. Yeah. I can imagine that being the one. Yeah. But didn't look cheap.
No, so the industry standard is called a Peter Pugger, and it's a de-airing, and you can put bone dry clay and wet clay all in the same place, and you get perfect clay at the end. But I think we're talking like, I don't know, $5,000.
Yeah.
It's quite. It would. I'm sure it would last you a lifetime. And at some point,
that kind of help. It's time efficient.
Absolutely. And at some point, I've just got no space for one in here. But yeah, so interested to go back to the Norway thing. So was that in your second year you did that?
No, that was our third year. Third year.
So it was at the
6
end.
months.
It was the end of our B days before we moved on to do the honours year. So it was a 4-year honours course.
And were you textiles?
No, did product design.
Oh, product design as well. Okay.
Both of us.
Both done product design.
Both in the same class. That's where we met. So very different design. Yeah, Jack's more into like mechanical. I'm more into what it looks like.
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, going to Norway was really good.
Man, the wood store in the back, it was like you go through and they're like, yeah, so we got a little bit of oak in, and it was like some local guy that had just like felled some oaks and planked it for the uni, just dropped it off.
And we had pizza in the ceramic thing.
Oh yeah, they done pizza in the ceramic oven, yeah.
Oh yes.
Like
There's probably loads of potters that are just like, oh god, they didn't do that.
Why? Yeah. Pizza's on kiln shelves.
Yeah, they've done that.
So it was good fun.
Done loads of metal work.
Where did you do the degree?
What, the UK degree, or so it was Edinburgh Napier.
Okay, nice. And how was that as an experience in general?
It was a good course. I don't know what it's like now, but we really enjoyed it.
We enjoyed it. There was a couple of key tutors that we got on really, really well with that made things really enjoyable.
It would be nice if they added a little bit more of business into it, though.
Yeah, sure.
If your idea is to not go into a full-time job, but to be self-employed, there wasn't a lot of what else do you do? You don't just make things. You have to have a certain degree of, okay, how do you do the books, or how do you do this? I mean, when I was starting up my business, I wanted to get some money to start up, so I went to the Prince's Trust. So great. I got a loan from them, and I had to do a bookkeeping course, and I had to do a pitch and all these different things. So it makes you think useful, about, okay, there's a lot to think about
all
here.
These other skills.
So
Yeah, I did Princess Trust and Business Wales as well, who were great. Obviously both completely free, and would massively recommend them to anyone.
Yeah.
But going back to the question you said about, what would you say to people who want to be potters or to work in some kind of similar way? I don't know what you guys, I guess maybe it was different because you were on a design focused course, but I think 3 years on a BA is not a massive amount of time to learn physical skills. And even if you've got the best tutors in the world, you will still have to do an academic module and do some other modules and do a blog. And like, I got quite frustrated in my second year about having to do projects that basically I didn't want to do. And one of the tutors very correctly said to me, "You've paid for an art education, not a craft apprenticeship. If you want a craft apprenticeship, you essentially needed to find a different course." And I don't think I was particularly happy about hearing it, but it is true. And I think sometimes people rock up to uni and they're like, "Oh, I'm going to become this like remarkable crafts person," and you can, but you just have to make sure that you have to turn up and you have to do it, right? And like you say, like you have made good friends with certain tutors, or like if you can build good relationships with tutors and technicians, the world's your oyster. And Cardiff Met in particular, like Cardiff Met's got a foundry, it's got the most unbelievable ceramics department, it's got amazing facilities, but you have to get up and go in and, you know,
put the work in.
Yeah. And I just think if you are going to try and be competitive in a like contemporary craft environment, if anything, you're like the content in your publication is quite intimidating, really. If you look at these people, it's like, for the love of God. And you know, as business people as well as, but like makers mainly. And I just think the biggest thing is like you've just got to absolutely like do not be like, if you're not super passionate about the practice, do not be like, that'll be a sweet career. Like you have to be absolutely like, I love this thing and I'm going to just tirelessly, you know, make things.
Yeah. It's up to you to make it the career. Like, let's be honest, a lot of the crafts on paper are not feasible as a career. People are moving now, but for the longest time, people were not buying that way.
Yeah.
And then now, yes, there's a bit of a move to it, but the reality is, if you're not going to, people are buying into the people. We are certainly noticing that. Like, and our buying habits are that, and it's what we're trying to do with We Are Makers is people are buying into you and your story as much as they like your ceramics.
Sure.
You know, and it kind of goes back to the trade shows and being there physically as well. And although trade shows are expensive for people, and equally, like you say, there's not everybody is good at doing that side of things, and it's intimidating and may put people back rather than project them forward. But I think the way people are buying now, if you're wholeheartedly invested in something, like, and to be wholeheartedly invested in something, you need to love it, like absolutely love it, and that's where I think it can become a career.
Yeah.
More so than just, I'm going to do this because it's all right. Like, it needs, it's another level of love for it, which is why I was really interested when you said like it just clicked. And it seems to happen more so than I would have expected. But people just, it clicks, and that's it. It's clicked, and it's there. Certainly not something that I think's happened to me. You know, I've grown to love the things that I love. It's not been an immediately like, yes, this is it. And I mean, that actually brings us back to the trade show thing. So have you only done Potter's trade shows?
Yes, and interestingly, the last one I was at, somebody said, "Oh, have you done any like mixed craft fairs?"
Yeah.
Yes, that would be good.
Which I'd be really interested to do. Partially just because it's lovely to see other crafts. I was at a festival in Carmarthen called For the Love of Nature. And have you guys heard of Lee John Phillips? He's done this amazing illustrative project where he's drawing every object in his granddad's shed.
No,
oh wow!
Look at it.
Well, you've got to look it up. Absolutely unbelievable. But he's like a spoon carver, and I did this because I was at the same show as him. I spent the afternoon. I left my partner on my stand, and I went and did his spoon carving course.
Oh, that's cute.
God. Yeah, because I was like, I really want a craft hobby that's not pots, so I can like sit on a Sunday and like whittle a spoon or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'd be really keen to do some other craft fairs anyway.
Yeah.
To like some MIC craft fairs, but no, not as yet.
And what about working with other crafters? Have collaborations been on the table, or is anything you've discussed or would like to discuss?
Yeah, I've got one of my best friends has just emigrated home from Canada, where he has been living with his wife and now child, and he's a amazing carpenter, woodworker that was doing cabinetry and like bespoke like built-in furniture stuff. But he's just moved back to Wales and is setting himself up. Curve Collection on Instagram, if anybody's interested. Curve with a K. Guy called Joe Stratford, and I'm really, really keen to. I don't know what yet. He's still like in the throes of trying to find a space and set up his studio. He's only recently moved back, but yeah, I'd be really, really keen to do some kind of wood. He's a woodworker and a metalworker actually, which is very convenient for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd be really keen to do some collaborative things.
Would be nice there.
Yeah, and we've both got quite like a similar kind of very pared back, simple aesthetic on the go. And yeah, it would be lovely to.
That would be cool.
Yeah, like any kind of, like he keeps talking about like handmade tiles for kitchens and stuff if he was doing kitchens, or just like giant pots for kind of interior stuff, or I don't know, I'd really like to have some kind of like wooden plinths and some lovely wooden trays for like coffee sets.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know. There's loads of stuff.
I'd just love to see like a room with like, say, Rapture and Wright's textiles and your pottery
Yeah,
and
yeah,
someone's
yeah.
wood. Like, can you imagine?
Yeah.
We're getting close
Amazing.
to the end of our renovation from a structural and surface level now, so the baton's about to be handed over to Kate for the making it nice part.
Oh, happy days. And also dangerous. Yeah.
Very
It's
dangerous,
terrifying.
Yeah, you guys. Yeah, you've got the whole publication to be like, it's a dangerous catalogue.
I know that is
Amazing.
dangerous, yeah.
Yeah, everyone's like, so where would you look for this? Kate's probably already got it all.
Yeah, it's all there.
Yeah, I've been seeing things like for the past 2 years whilst doing the book, and I'm thinking, okay, someday I'll be able to get it.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So, yeah.
But I was interesting. What's the name of the gentleman you were speaking to yesterday?
Peter.
Peter.
Yeah.
Like going back to like advice for people, and he was saying, you know, what was it in that soundbite that you guys posted? Like you've got to make beautiful things, basically.
Yeah.
But I had a conversation with a guy, like a very well-established potter. I think it was 2 years ago at Art and Clay, maybe a year ago. And he, in a kind of more like a rationalist, kind of crueler way, was like, you don't have to make good things; you have to make things that people want to buy.
Yeah.
Which I know is a bit less, it's a bit crueler. But occasionally I do, like I see the most extraordinary ceramic objects that are amazingly executed, and the most like unbelievable amount of skill and work has gone into them. But I think, is there a market for it? And it's so like cruel, you know. But I don't know. Like, did he speak to that at all? Like, you know,
Yeah, so
working
that-
commercially or working.
Yeah, and it's actually something that I was going to bring up with yourself, because he touched on a couple of points, and we'll get to some of the questions in a bit. But what Peter was really transparent about was they made their stuff, and then there was a key point where you had to just make a little adjustment towards what people wanted,
Yeah.
and another little adjustment, and another little adjustment. And it's just been constant adjustments. So they always done fabric, and then they started doing wallpaper, and then what can they make with the fabric? You know, so it's like the value added.
Yeah.
So they're then doing their own cushions and stuff, which are fantastic.
They do lights, and they did a collaboration. He's like, I don't ever show anyone my lights because, you know,
They're
he's
really
a bit
nice.
it's a bit like the packaging thing. Like, he's like,
Oh,
I'm going
okay.
to show
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
So, yeah. It's,
But they are really
they're
nice.
really nice.
So anyone listening, message them and be like, let's see your light. Because they are really good.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then they're doing other little, so that's kind of like a side project, less connected to the textiles, but the textiles and, well, I say the textiles, but it's not really the textiles, it's the print. It's the print that they
Yeah.
do. So they do it on textile and they do it on paper for wallpaper. But yeah, they're adding the sort of value adds of cushions and throws and all that kind of stuff. And then it sounds like a lot of their work is through, which was the question for yourself, is through interior designers. So they do more business to business. Is that something you've ever looked at or thought on?
Yeah, so that's something I'm looking to, like some kind of more wholesale related stuff that hopefully will kick off next year. But also, and again, my sister, the PR and marketing guru, is like, but you need to be making friends with interior designers and architects, basically. And not only would that be like a good idea from a business point of view, but it would just be something that I would love to do as a project. Like find some interior designers that really resonated with me. That would be just a awesome thing to be able to do, to like maybe work a little bit in response to some spaces, or 'cause that's not something I've done too much. Kind of work in isolation, just make whatever I want, which is great. But it would be lovely to be like, here's a space, here's an idea, here's a, you know, the kind of driving force behind this thing we're doing. Like, what kind of objects would you want to bring to it, or something, you know, something responsive in that way would be wicked. But again, like to come like in that general vein, and in relation to what Peter was talking about, I think it's interesting, like, you know, you've mentioned a few times that one of the things that ties a lot of these makers together is like their honesty and sincerity in the things they make, right? It's not contrived. They're not making it purely on like a commercial driver.
Yeah.
However, there's some kind of balance. Like, if you do want to try and make a business like this work, you have to find a way to do something which is really sincere, which is really honest, but also be open to being maneuverable within that, I suppose, right? Not like completely reinvent yourself because you think it'll sell, or like following a trend.
Yeah.
But at least being able to be like dynamic enough to be like, oh, actually, I could still be myself, but I could just tweak it like this.
Yes.
And it means that I could
absolutely.
buy that wheel that I needed, or that I could, that the business has the chance to grow and stuff.
So Peter done a really, really good job, and obviously Rapture and Write have been 18, 20 years now. So they're for us, they're a bit of an education to speak to them from that point of view. And he made a very clear point. It's not a 180 you're doing. It's maybe 30 degrees.
Yeah.
And then another 30 degrees later on. He referenced, there is a word for it in Japanese culture, and he referenced that word. And I can't remember what it is. But I did Google it. It's probably still open on a tab on my phone. And it sums it up perfectly. The constant small iterations, and they can be very minor tweaks.
Yeah.
Let them run, look back on them, little minor tweak, let them run, look back on them. But actually, in talking about your working in a space, the guys at Rapture and Write also done something similar, which they seem to really enjoy.
With Timorous Beasties in Glasgow.
Oh, nice. Timorous Beasties is awesome.
Yeah.
So they were working in that space with Timorous Beasties,
Yeah.
but then the one I was going to mention was the arts house that they got given a room, pretty much a room, like, you can use do this. So it was very, and they spoke very fondly of that experience, being able to work to a space. And it'd be interesting to know if more makers had done similar. Like, you obviously seem very keen to do it, and hopefully the opportunity does arise for you. But it just takes you a little bit out of your usual inspiration.
Yeah,
Do you know, because you're
Gives you a
inspired by a
challenge,
space.
doesn't it? Just,
Yeah, but and again, it kind of speaks to that thing of like, it gives you a challenge, but it's still, and it's something new and it's something different, but it's still you get to be yourself within
Yes.
that thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
they're wanting you to come to do the project. 'cause
they
it's
want you. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, we want this, but we want it unapologetically Bert Jones. That's what we want.
Yeah. And if somebody said, "Can we have flat white cups with ducks on?" I would say no. That is
That's
too far
not
for me to.
me.
That's too much of a tweak.
No one's going to come and be like, oh, that's Bert Jones.
No. But if somebody wanted something, well, I don't know off the top of my head, but I think that's a really good way that Peter's put it. Like these kind of tweaking around always, but never quite like. Yeah, if you're doing full 180s, you're going to get confused very fast.
And your customers.
Yeah, I think
are gonna
that's
get
exactly
confused.
what-
Yeah, exactly.
They're
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Sorry, I wasn't prepared for this.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, the customer thing is a big thing. People are perceiving you and loving you for what you do. And then if you flip it round, especially when most of us are looking at online, you're not relating that. I could see 2 posts of yours 2 weeks apart and immediately know it's yours.
Sure. Yeah.
I think we've covered quite a lot. Kate, you've usually got a very good question at this time.
Well, it's like, what advice would you give your younger self? Like,
Oh my goodness. Younger Bert was very confused, guys. Goodness me.
it's a hard question because I think that to myself. I'm like, what?
Eat more vegetables and go to bed earlier. No, I think one of the things for me, although it was challenging, like in my early 20s, to be like, oh, this physics course isn't for me, and this mech eng course isn't for me, and financial advice isn't for me, and what on earth is going on? What then happened was, when I did this art foundation, because I had the contrast of, like, I think so many people go to university, and like, I don't think anybody should go to uni at 18. I think that's insane.
We were talking about this yesterday.
Absolutely insane.
Yeah.
How on earth are you supposed to know what to devote 3 years of your life to? I think university is great. But yeah, I think because I'd done all that being confused and making all these bad choices, then when something came along which really resonated with me, it resonated so aggressively. And when I got in the doors at Cardiff Met, I was like, I'm ready to go. I wasn't messing around at that point. I was like, I lived there. And I was like very committed to this. Like it just made it so clear what an amazing opportunity it was. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, there were some bad haircuts. Maybe I would advise against those. It's a really difficult question, actually.
You think about it.
I guess, going back to the, let your nature be your guide thing, I should have been a bit more honest with myself about what I actually really enjoyed. Because I did know that I was like, I loved practical stuff.
Yeah.
And I was too easily swayed by basically I was just decent at physics in school. And I was like, I could do a physics degree. And everyone was like, yeah, it's a great idea. And I was like, okay. If you say it's a great idea, then I'll crack on with it. Yeah. And I should have had more gumption to say, guys, I don't want to be a physicist. I want to be creative.
So how long did you stick each of those degrees?
I did a year of physics, And then I switched and did a year of mechanical engineering. But in all honesty, I just really didn't want to leave uni. I was moving into a student house with a load of dudes that I really loved. And it was a bit of like I was like, oh, mech eng it'll be a bit more applied. So I'll be much happier. It wasn't that much more applied. It's still very, very heavily mathematical and physicsy. And then, there were some workshops where you got to like take apart an engine or I don't know. But it was still super, super academic. And then, dropped out. The financial advice job was given to me by my godmother. My mum was like, for the love of God, he's dropped out of uni and he's just like moping around at home being useless. Give him a job. So I was given this trainee financial advice job by my godmother, who is an awesome lady. I think I spent 2 years there maybe, and it really wasn't for me. And I was a bit like, what am I supposed to do? I did something called a Mongol rally. It's like a charity rally where you drive to Mongolia.
Yeah, I know the Mongol rally.
Yeah, so that's a good indication of like, Bert's got no idea what to do, so he's going to drive to Mongolia.
Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah,
that's
it was awesome.
Wild.
It was awesome.
That's
I'm fully going to segue
different.
off a Maker podcast now. Tell us about the Mongol rally. Because the Mongol rally is...
I've never heard of it, so...
Yeah, so you drive
Get comfy.
Drive a 1 litre car from somewhere in Europe to Ulaanbaatar, which is the capital of Mongolia, and it's like a charity thing, yeah. Absolutely extraordinary. I think probably not as, like maybe not as feasible now. I don't know what route people take through Europe. That's
no idea.
We drove across Ukraine. A lot of people drove through like kind of the southern part of like the middle of Asia and stuff. And it's just, I don't know what that would be like now. But it was incredible. Really, really incredible experience.
It's an experience.
But that was like a classic kind of I've got no idea what I'm doing with my 20s. So me and 2 of my mates did that basically. And then I came home and was like, okay, went back to this financial advice job and was like, okay, I think really I do need to give something creative a chance. So an art foundation is perfect because it was inexpensive. It was, I was going to say a year, but it's probably like 9 months long. And I did that art foundation and was like, I'm happy and satisfied and interested. So let's crack on and do a degree.
Wonderful.
So that would have been my advice. Just be a bit more honest with yourself, I think.
It's good
I think you've probably been more honest with yourself than you're giving yourself credit for, though. The amount of people that would have stuck that out for 4 years just to get their degree.
Yeah, do you think so?
And then just dropped off after that.
But it's not for you.
And then went and done something. Yeah, exactly.
Like, life's too short.
Yeah, I guess it's ironic actually because I should have. When Peter says you need to make these 30-degree changes, that's what I did, and I should have done a 180.
Physics,
you're right. Mech eng,
Yeah.
finance, and I should have been like, no, this is working. But once you get on a good track, then little tweaks, I guess.
Well, we are very glad you made the changes.
Thank you guys.
So you've got a cracking article out there and a cracking podcast.
Oh, you're very kind. You're very kind.
So we'll wrap it up at that, I think, won't we?
So thanks very much for having us here.
No, I can't thank you guys enough, honestly. It's been an absolute pleasure. Yeah, I was very apprehensive. I was like, what on earth am I going to say? But you guys are lovely and very disarming, and it's been a real pleasure.
That's what Peter said. He was like, you made it very easy. And that's what we want, because we want people to tell us their story without being like, oh, I'm not sure. I'm not sure
honestly, it's been a real pleasure. And I guess you think about a lot of these things, but you don't necessarily like articulate them. So
I'm the same.
You need someone just to probe.
Yeah.
Keep probing and you get more out. So where do people find you, Bert? We've talked about your Instagram a lot.
So people find me at Bert the Potter on Instagram, which is BERT the Potter, or they find me online at bertthepotter.com. My shop goes live. Oh, well, this won't come out today, so there's no point talking about that. I'll have a shop at some point in the future.
And if they don't find you there, they find you in this cracking little shed on the side of your house.
Exactly.
In Newport, Wales.
That's right.
Brilliant.
Perfect.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.